Hey everybody, my name is Jason Calacanis. I'm an angel investor from America. This is Michael Savino. He is a venture partner at Launch. We invest in 40 or 50 companies a year, and we've invested in over 150. We're here in Sydney, not for Angel University, not for Launch Festival Sydney. Those are fronts. Those are fronts for us to find 3, 4, 5 companies a year to invest in with all of you. So the events are a conversation and a way for us to meet you and to share what we've learned and to have you share what you've learned with us. Every market's different. We know that how things operate down under might be slightly different than how things operate in America. Certainly on a political basis, it's slightly different these days. A little bit crazy in America. We apologize. We're as confounded as you are, candidly. But it's great to be here. The last time I was here was 10 years ago, and it was just amazing to have the Sydney government, New South Wales, invite us to come down here and do this, and we are blown away by the response. Angel University is something we came up with about a year ago after my book came out, and what we realized was there was really no manual on angel investing. There was no best practices. Venture capital certainly had a lot of standards, but what we saw in America and what we predict will happen here is that an emerging class of professional angel investors will appear. And this has happened in America where people have not just done angel investing as something they do on the side to help their friends, and which that is certainly valid. What we're seeing in America is people are starting to say, I'm going to make this my job. I'm going to make a career out of angel investing. So I'll invest in 10 companies a year for 5 years and have a portfolio of 50 companies, and this will be my career or vocation. And so I wrote a book about angel investing, which was a way for us to share everything we've learned. And we made a lot of mistakes angel investing, but we also hit 6 unicorns along the way, and out of the first 120 investments. So that's about 1 every 20 investments. And we hit about a dozen companies worth over $100,000. So we figured a couple of things out about how to angel invest without losing money, hopefully, and hopefully in order to make a lot of money. And we're going to share that with you today. The program is being recorded, so a couple of ground rules. If you don't mind, if you could turn off your phone ringers, that's great. And if you could save your questions to the end of each of the 5 sections we're going to go through. And we're going to go through them quickly. We're going to assume a little bit of knowledge here in the room. And how many people have made an angel investment already? Raise your hand if you've made angel investments, right about half the room. And how many people are planning to in the next year? Raise your hand. And that's the other half of the room. Perfect. That's what we're looking for, is a mix of people who've done it, who can share their experiences, and people who haven't. So we're going to go through the first 4 sections. That's going to take about 2 hours, depending on how many questions you have. And then we're going to do live interactions, where we're going to have a meeting between founders that I have not met, Mike hasn't met, Asher hasn't met, and we're going to actually conduct a live first meeting with 3 of the founders who are going to be presenting on Tuesday and Wednesday at the Launch Festival. And you'll get to see how I might handle that interaction, and then we'll sportscast it, which is to say we'll pretend that we're watching a soccer match or a basketball game and talk about what went well in that interaction and what didn't. So let me hand it over to Mike, who will talk to you a little bit more about what's going on here. Again, we'll do questions at the end of each section. If you just give me a little hand raise, we'll point to you, and they'll run a microphone to you. And here's how the microphones work. And here's how they do not work very well if you do this kind of a thing. And certainly if you start asking a question like this, it's going to drop off. No need in the question to promote your product or service to the rest of us. So it's a disclaimer for that guy. You know that guy who's like, Jason, it's great to have you here in Australia. I've got an amazing set of condos I'd like to sell you. And I want to know what kind of angel investment you think condos in North Korea would be. That'd be the last Trump impersonation of the event.
It will be the last one.
It's a great, tremendous impersonation. Everybody knows it. Okay, Mike.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. So just by way of introduction, I mean, you all know who Jason is. my one claim to fame is that I was his first boss. So that's probably his only boss and the only person he ever listened to in his whole career. So that's why I'm here. Other than his wife, right? So I've owned a number of professional service companies in New York, had 2 exits. Currently, I own a e-commerce digital agency in New York, which hopefully we'll get an exit from soon. I've been angel investing with Jason since 2012. My first angel investment was a company called Brilliant.org, which is one of Jason's portfolio companies. Big fan of the book, and unfortunately, I also grabbed a bunch of information from some other competitive sources, but we want it to be fair. We hope you get a lot out of today. As Jason mentioned, we have breakpoints where we'll ask for questions, and if we think that something is being covered in a future section, we might just ask you to hold that question. Normally, we do this class over about 8 hours. We're going to try and squeeze it into 4, but I think we'll be fine.
We'll be able to do it. And yeah, write your questions down, no problem. Concise questions, always welcome.
Right. So what kind of angel are you? I think one of the important things that you have to consider is that while this is a financial exercise, the greater challenge is the emotional exercise that you go through as an angel investor. If you look at Jason here, as you just mentioned, Jason, arguably one of the greatest of all time now, right? 6 unicorns. Maybe was it 6 or 7? I thought it was 7.
There might be a 7th, but it's not announced.
Okay. At least 2 or 3 other in the hopper, we think, right?
Yep.
In the fund. Not one of his investments is purely liquid yet. And you've been doing it since when?
2008 is when I made the Uber, Thumbtack, and DataStax investments, 3 of the first 6 or 7 being unicorns.
Right. So think about that. He's been doing this for 10 years. He already knows he's going to be successful, but hasn't necessarily reaped the financial dollar reward yet in his bank account. And that's really what we want to get across in this first section. This is something that you really want to think about before you jump into, right? You want to take a very long-term view of your money. You shouldn't put money that you want to buy a house with into this. You shouldn't put money that you want to put your children through college through this. You shouldn't put your retirement funds through this, because you don't know when you, or even if, you will see this money back. And it is quite possible that you won't see any of it back. When you go through this, you're going to experience failure first and success later. So what I always like to say is that it's almost constantly telling you you're an idiot for doing it and you should stop. And that's kind of the personal belief you have to have in the process to go through it. You're going to be dealing with a lot of difficult people in that, wonderful, difficult people. But really the most important thing to consider is that you should really think about what else you're going to get out of this. If it's just a financial exercise, you can day trade. You can play poker. There are lots of other options to throw your money away other than angel investing. For me personally, I'm an electrical engineering major, a technologist. I feel like I learn a lot in talking to these founders. Jason and I co-syndicated a deal for a company that developed a hydrogel called Controline that's being used to perform a reversible, non-hormonal vasectomy. It was fascinating. I did a bunch of research on the web. I learned a lot about a topic I knew nothing about. And in a way, it kind of keeps you sharp, keeps you up to date. It's like better than any magazine subscription that you might have over time. And it keeps you interested in it. For somebody like Jason, who had a really great exit, part of it is maybe giving back, right? He enjoyed some success. And I think he's probably one of the greatest examples of somebody who's decided to commit his life to giving back to a community and build a community, first in the United States and now here in Sydney, that really appreciates his effort, and the fact that he's trying to do it in such a way that he causes the least amount of friction for young entrepreneurs and people that are really trying to get ahead of themselves. Right?
Yeah, and one of the great things is, since I started angel investing, a new rub has come out, and we're going to get to it, which is secondary offerings. So you may have read Uber had 2 different secondary offerings. There might have been other ones that occurred. And so even without Uber having IPO'd yet, or Thumbtack, or Robinhood, or some of these other companies, there have been many opportunities along the way for me as an investor and a fund manager to decide if I wanted to sell some shares early. And without mentioning specific companies, I have taken advantage of early liquidity options to dollar cost average along the way and to take some chips off the table. So we'll get into that later in the program. But non-financial motivations are really important, I think, when you think about this. I tell people it's the greatest job in the world because every week I meet with 10 to 20 founders, and they tell me how the world's going to change, why they're doing it, and how they're going to change the world. It's incredibly exciting, and you get to hang out with the people who actually change the world and become friends with them. And even for that reason alone, if angel investing was a government job that paid $100,000 a year and you had no upside, that'd probably be the job I would choose to do because it's the most exciting one. Some people choose teaching for that reason. I choose angel investing for that reason. It makes you incredibly smart. And if you have kids, think about this for a moment. If you could give your kids $200,000 and say, instead of going to university, I'd like you to make 40 angel investments with that money. You know, make a bunch at $2,000 and then double down on the winners, and then maybe even go work at whichever one was the best. Which do you think would be a better thing for your child to do? And even if you don't have kids, I'll have you answer this question. Would you rather your kids invested the $200,000 and then went to work for the winner, or would you rather they went to university? How many people would rather they invested the money and learned that way? And then how many people would rather they go and spend $200,000 on a university? And it's okay if you disagree. Which is interesting because it's about... Both. Okay, so they're very rich. We want you to go to university, and while you're there, we want you to invest in 40 companies. I like the way you think, sir. We're going to be friends. Work harder. So anyway, I use that as a test just to sort of think about how much you'll learn. And if you just said, hey, you went to undergrad, and would you do that for your MBA? Going for your Master's of Business Administration in the U.S., we call that, I don't know what they call it here. But if you're going for your MBA for $200,000 or going into investing, I bet you the ratio would have been even further. Go invest, because what if one of them hits? Now, instead of being $200,000 in debt, you're $400,000 profit. Okay, let's keep moving.
So Jason, just out of curiosity, how many people do you see maybe enter angel investing and then give up once they realize the kind of pain that you go through because they thought it was going to be a quick buck?
Yeah, you'll see a lot of people dabble. I see it a lot in poker too. People dabble, they come to the poker table, they read a book or two, and then they have that night where they lose, 6 or 7 hands in a row, and they're just like, this game is stupid, or I suck at it. And it's like, or it could just be a bad beat, and statistically, you just got unlucky. So I see that happen. Usually the people who, the real cardinal sin I see more often than that is people saying, I want to invest about $250,000 as an angel investor. And then they meet their cousin's roommate who couldn't raise money from professional angel investors but has an incredible idea, and they give them $150,000. They never get the product launched. They come back and ask for another 100. They give them the 100, and the product still doesn't launch, and they've lost $250 on one bet or 2 bets in the same company from somebody who couldn't clear a market with what I'll call experienced professional investors. And that is the big mistake I see more often than not, is people invest in their friends, sisters, cousins, brothers, uncle, roommate. That's the problem.
So the other thing we want you to think about is what your offering is. So, while you are meeting with founders, other than money, which everybody is going to want, obviously, you should think about what your superpower is. What is it that you can help them with? And it can be many different things. You might have a technical background and help them with development. You might have some specific vertical industry expertise that you offer, and many angel investors center their portfolio around that vertical expertise. But to a large extent, it's your network, right? Many of your founders, if you hopefully will be getting kind of reports for them on a regular basis, monthly updates or quarterly updates, typically what they're going to ask you for are introductions to either other investors, but more importantly, employees. Generally, you'll find that angel investors are extremely networked people. They have a large group of people that they can reach out to and help the founders. And they will want help. Sometimes they won't, and you probably shouldn't force it upon them, but very often they will. And on the previous slide, we talked about giving tough love and being a mentor. They typically will have problems, and they're going to come to you with those problems. And if you're constantly just beating them up about why they're not delivering, you're probably not doing them a service, and you're not being realistic about this. Because going into it, you unlike regular investing where you're looking at companies and everything looks great, but you're kind of combing through the financials and trying to find out what might be wrong. Here, kind of everything looks wrong, and you're just trying to find out what might be right. And that's really the big difference from a kind of investing perspective. And sometimes I actually find that very experienced stock market investors, people who are really good at that, struggle with this because they find it difficult to invest based on one potential aspect of an investment that might seem amazing or great or could be world-changing, as Jason says. So you want to find out how you can help. I had a really interesting experience where when I first started, luckily because I'm friends with Jason, I was always invited to the conference. And in my second year, there was a winner of the Launch Festival. It was a young gentleman, and I went up to him and I said, I loved your presentation, and I'd like to talk to you about investing in your company. And his answer to me was, well, you need to explain to me why I should take your money. And I was like, that's a pretty good question. I really don't know. But it makes you think about what it is. Luckily for me, because I'm friends with this guy, people come up to me, I think, because they think they can get an introduction to Jason, which is always a good superpower, but nevertheless, they come to me. So bad advice. One of our competing organizations has published a similar class to this and have said some things that we kind of fundamentally disagree with. I mean, you should be doing this to make money. It's responsible investing. It's not charity. And you should not kind of rush into this because you think you might miss out on something. This is a kind of, it's a bit of an art, but there is a considered process that we're going to try and teach you today. And you should stick to the discipline, much in the same way that poker players stick to a certain amount of discipline, right, around money management.
Absolutely. We call it bankroll management in poker. And how many people play poker by chance or have played? Raise your hand. Not very popular in this country. After this, we're all going to go play some poker, go to the ATM. You're going to have a great time. You really do not want to think of this as charity. You want to think of this as portfolio management, and you want to shape your bets. And you want to go slow in the beginning. And if somebody is trying to use a FOMO tactic with you, the round is closing, you have to make a decision. This is a sign that it's a red flag. In some cases, yes, a round could be closing quickly. But the fact that the founder is using that technique with you, to me, is a little bit of a red flag. You always want to do diligence. You always want to think about the investment. You never want to, on the spot, say, I'll invest. If you're doing a meeting with somebody and they say, so, moment of truth comes after the 45-minute coffee, an hour lunch, or in a conference room, do you want to invest? How much would you like to invest? A good founder will ask that. How much would you like to invest? You should say, I'd like to think about it for 2 or 3 days. I have some questions I'm sure I'll come up with, but I find it super fascinating, and I like A, B, and C about what you're doing. And they go, okay, great, let's talk. And then I just set a date. Let's talk a week from today. Boom. And I actually put it on the calendar like that. Never, ever give a commitment in a meeting, because you may then wind up doing some due diligence and find something, then have to tell them, well, I'm not going to, and then you have some reputation damage potentially where the founder says, yeah, they offered me $50,000, and then they backed out. And they never say, the reason they backed out is because you vested all your shares on day one. We'll get into vesting of shares later. And that was a no-go for you. Or they misrepresented something, right?
So these are the 2 books that this course was kind of built around typically. One was written by a gentleman out of New York who leads New York's Angel Group, David Rose, and then Jason's book. And the reason I like to put this up there is because they really kind of take a different point of view in terms of investing. And in many ways in the United States, it's almost a difference between people that live in New York and Boston versus people that are in Silicon Valley. And Asher, you're kind of a little bit in both, right? You've been on both sides of the coast, so maybe you can back this up. But typically, a lot of the early investing that came out of the East Coast was very financial. There needed to be a sign that there would be a payback. How is the revenue going to come through? There needed to be a certain amount of certainty around that investing. And you should think about how your brain works in terms of talking to people. Whereas when you go to Silicon Valley, and when I started working with Jason, it's much more aspirational. They're much more interested in ideas that are going to change the world. They're not asking about early revenue. They're talking about how many users. They're looking at growth. They're looking at potential size down the road. And those investments can be even a little bit more difficult, right? If somebody had explained Facebook to you before you know what Facebook was going to be, it might seem like a ridiculous idea, right? The most extreme example I always like to talk about is, I'm an investor in Jason's fund, and Jason decided to invest in a nonprofit because they were going to change the world. Hand Up, right? Why don't you talk a little about what Hand Up does?
Hand Up was a B Corporation, which was somewhere in the United States, but it's called a benefit corporation, a new structural entity that's not a nonprofit, not a for-profit. It's most similar to a for-profit in that they have profits and they can have shareholders in that way. And it's similar to a nonprofit in that they have a mission. And the board members are designed, or they're charged with, making sure they fulfill not just increasing shareholder value, but also with achieving that mission. In the case of Hand Up, they were building software to help homeless organizations help raise money for and transition people out of poverty. It didn't work out. It was a very small bet, 50K, I think. But I made that small investment from our fund, which was a $10 million fund. It was 50,000, so it's less than 1%, 0.5%, because I thought we should really understand this B Corporation phenomenon. If millennials, young people in America are going to, and here, are going to be so focused on mission instead of profits, or mission in equal parts to profit, I want to know how they think and how this new structure might work. So we lost that money, but we gained a ton of knowledge. Turns out when you put a social mission on any entrepreneurial activity, you eliminate any venture capitalist from wanting to be involved. It is literally kryptonite. Venture capitalists will say up and down, like, oh, totally triple bottom line, whatever, and then they will give you a high five and tell you it's not a fit. They couldn't get their partners to agree on investing. Also, Calm.com was another one. We did an investment in a meditation app 4 years ago. We put $378,000 into it, $328,000 from our syndicate, $50,000 from our fund, and it was a $5 million valuation. So we own about 7-8% of that company. We've been diluted a little bit. And people said, you're investing in a meditation app with maybe $10,000 or $20,000 in revenue. And I looked at it and I said, UCLA, the college in America, is created a school for studying mindfulness and meditation. The Lakers and Phil Jackson, the basketball team, are getting Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal to meditate. I think this is going to be sort of like yoga, except yoga, you have to go to a room, and with meditation, you actually just close your eyes and put headphones in. So this is perfectly designed for the iPhone and the App Store, and this is before the App Store had subscriptions. And then the App Store got subscriptions, and we changed it from $10 a year to $10 a month. That company did. They're doing almost 9 figures in revenue, and last year they were the app of the year. 50 investors said no. 2 of us said yes. That $378,000 investment, based on the last round, is worth $17 million. Based on the latest revenue, it's worth double that. So it's probably a $35 million position after a $378,000 investment. And that's based on real revenue in a real company. And nobody could see it because it was meditation. It looked weird. And what I always look at is, well, what if it does work? And this is a really hard thing to change your mindset from. Our minds are designed to look for the crack in the windshield. So if you came up to a $100,000 Tesla and that big, beautiful windshield in the front had a crack in it, you wouldn't look at the leather seats, the gull-wing doors, the spoiler, the electric, the auto thing. We just look at the cracked windshield. It's just how our minds work. We look for the crack. And I always encourage people to make a big, long list of why this company will fail. And then list the 1 or 2 reasons of why it might work and what the world would look like if it did work. So in the case of Calm, what if they charged $10 a month? What if 100,000 or 200,000 people signed up for it? What would that look like? Well, it would look like what it looks like now. What are the chances of it happening? 1%, 2%, 3%? Okay, if it does happen, what would that do to our investment? Okay, our investment would be a 50x or a 100x investment. Good enough for me. Right? I'm always looking for a 100x in return on my money when I invest as an angel. 100x. Doesn't mean it's always going to happen. But I like the founder to explain to me how that's going to happen. How do you think you get to 100x? So if it's a $5 million valuation, well, that would be $500 million. And if you got diluted 20%, maybe it would be $600 or $700 million exit. I always like to go through that exercise. If they can't do it and I can't do it, well, maybe it can't be done. But I take that big, long list of why it won't work, and I just say, that's the punch list of what we have to get done. Oh, we got to fix the windshield, and the car's done. Oh, it's got a dent? Okay, we fixed the dent, we fixed the windshield, it's a brand new car. But that's not how most people's minds work, and so you have to rethink how you assess risk. I look at what is the opportunity. Another way to look at it is if I said, I'll let you give me $1,000, and if you pull the ace of spades from that deck of cards, I'll give you $200,000. Most people will be like, well, there's no chance I'm pulling the ace of spades out, so I'm not going to do it. But if you ask anybody who understands probability, they'd say, how many times can I pull cards? Can I pull 200 cards? Can I put $200,000 on the table right now to pull 200 cards? Because technically, I'm going to hit 3 or 4 aces of spades because there's 52 decks in the card. You get the idea. It's a 2% chance roughly. And so you have to rewire yourself and how you assess risk. What happens, not what can go wrong, what can go right? And if it does work, what does the world look like? Airbnb is the best example of this. I didn't have an opportunity to invest in Airbnb, but I would have not done it, especially not 8 years ago. I might do it now. But when I heard that idea and they said to me, you can rent your couch, so if you have $1,000 a month rent, you can rent your couch for $50, and if you do that 20 days a month, you're living rent-free. And I said, you can rent your couch to a stranger. And they said, yeah. But I mean, they log in with Facebook, so you kind of have an idea of who they are, and they write reviews of them, and you write reviews of them, so there's like a community. I was like, so you're renting it to a serial killer? And they're like, no, you're renting it to, and then like, well, you could rent somebody else's couch. And I was like, so I can sleep on a serial killer's couch. This makes no sense to me. But I wasn't the audience. The audience for this were millennials, young people, and then where they started, renting couches, literally couches, became extra bedrooms, became guest houses, became dedicated units, became dedicated houses, became dedicated companies that have 100 units on Airbnb. Now, I didn't see that progression because my mind was way too limited. I went with my gut reaction. It'll never work. So I encourage you to say, what if it does? What if it does? What if it does? And keep suspending disbelief. And I think that's how West Coast, because I'm from New York, I'm a New York guy. If you said you were going to do something ambitious, your friends would just make fun of you for as long as you kept talking about it. Whereas on the West Coast, if you say you want to do something ambitious, people are like, oh, you want to colonize Mars? Cool, tell me more. How are you going to do that? I was like, oh, well, I'm going to make rockets land themselves, and then I'm going to get to the contract, then I'm going to put a series of satellites up to create, a web of internet connections so everybody on the globe can have internet, and then I'll use that money to fund that. I'm going to create an electric car company to fund us going to Mars. It's like, okay, let's go. Sure, let's do it. Cool, it could work. And it's that iteration, and it's that belief in taking each step along the way and just doing the best you can that makes entrepreneurs change the world. It's something in Sydney, I think, I see the entrepreneurs are even a little bit not ambitious enough. That's what I've been, in the deals I'm looking at right now, almost universally the founders are too meek about raising money. Because I'm sitting there, I'm like, are you going to ask me to invest? They're like, well, do you want to? I'm like, I'm an angel investor. You're a founder raising money. This is our 3rd meeting. Why are we here? I came to the dance. I want to dance. The music's playing. The DJ's here. We've had a couple of drinks. Take me on the dance floor. Let's go. Right? Okay, let's keep moving.
So, in the East Coast, a 10x investment is a good investment, right? Like, from any accounting principle, if you look at an investment over a 5 to 10 year kind of time frame, 10x is great. But I've heard Jason often say that 10x bores him. Like, they almost, it was like you missed a chance to be 100 or 1,000x. The one word I want to kind of draw your attention to here is venture scale. Venture scale is kind of the term that I hear most often now in the community, and it's the idea that you can get to 100 million in revenue, and can you somehow work, not from a total addressable market basis, but from a bottom-up basis, can you somehow figure out how this company is going to get to $100 million in annual revenue, 10x, gives you $1 billion company?
Venture scale is a term that never had a number attached to it. It just meant a company that grew violently with massive profits. Because so many founders kept asking me, well, what does that mean? I just picked a number. And I said 100 million in revenue with 50 million in profits, because it was very easy for people to remember. And the reason I come up with that number is because a 20 times earnings would equal $1 billion, and $1 billion equals a unicorn. And if you own 20% of a unicorn as a venture capital firm, and we're angel investors, so the venture capitalists are downstream, in their minds, they're looking to return their entire fund in one investment. So most venture funds that are small have 200, 300, 400 million in, under management each fund. That means they make no money until they clear that number. So if the venture firm has got 300 million and they own 25% of $1 billion or $2 billion company, they could potentially clear that hurdle of then getting paid. They're in the bonus. And so if a founder can't explain credibly, we're going to get to 100 million with a 50% margin, VCs will not fund it. They have to see that pattern. Now, sometimes a company with no revenue will get bought for $1 billion. Sometimes a company with 150 million will get bought for 500 million. There's quality of revenue and a lot of other factors that go into a sale. Obviously, sometimes companies battle it out and they want to buy a bike sharing company. We just had a bike sharing company get bought by Jump Bikes, got bought by Uber for 200 million. What people didn't understand is, yeah, they're overpaying. Probably the realistic price was 100, so they paid an extra 100 million. Well, it's 100 million to keep it from their competitor, and if they move it to 5 cities really quick, they make their money back instantly. So they just had the inside metrics on that. So that's venture scale.
Right. So the other thing that's kind of changed over the years is historically, angel investing isn't something that's been around very long, the 60s. The change in laws and the ability for people like Jason to create syndicates has changed the ability of people in terms of their level of commitment on how to participate. So we've just kind of talked about the process that you go through and some of the difficulties. Well, if maybe you want to put your toe in a little bit and start participating in it, and you don't want to commit that much money, you can go through syndicates and do $1,000 to $3,000 investments versus $25,000 or $50,000 investments, and keep that kind of broad base of being in enough companies. And we'll talk about what number constitutes enough a little bit later on in the presentation. But this is a little bit of a new phenomenon. Like, you really couldn't treat this as a hobby or a passive event, like maybe investing in the stock market, but now you can. So there are a lot of options open to you. So you should take into account what we've spoken about in terms of the emotional aspect and decide how you want to jump into this. Because there is a progression. You can start out on a passive basis and then move yourself up a little bit to make it full time if you like it. And then if you don't like it, or if you discover that, look, this just isn't for me, there's too much risk, time horizon is too long, you can back out.
Yeah, and here we just described it from 2 hours a month to 200 hours a month. And one of the great things about this career is you could do it full time, take 6 months off, come back to it part time, and do it 20 hours a week. You can throttle this up and down. I've seen people make 20 investments and say, there's too many phone calls, too many emails, I'm taking the next year off, I'm just going to help my 20 companies get it over the finish line for a year or two. I just don't want to take any more meetings. And the number one reason why people stop angel investing is they get rich. It happens all the time in Silicon Valley. We have a term for it. Instead of calling in sick, people call in rich. They're like, yeah, I don't feel like coming to work today. Like, are you sick? You feeling well? It's like, no, I feel rich. So fuck it. Staying home. One note, you don't have to take pictures of every slide. We're going to give you the entire deck. And my friend Dale, who raised his hand, there he is, hey pal, is going to release these all on his amazing app. All these videos will be available afterwards. Okay.
All right, so that's the end of the first section. I'll just open it up for questions really quick. This is going to make sense.
Please wait for the microphone. Thank you. We have a question in the front row over here. Raise your hand nice and high. And Dale's going to run the microphone. Look at that speed. Nicely done, Dale.
Quick question. So
Right into the microphone, sir. Tell us your name and the city you're from.
My name's Abby, and I'm from Auckland. And I've got a question around investing. So I've invested as part of a fund and directly into a startup. What's the difference between a syndicate and a fund?
Great. Syndicates are funds that are designed to make an investment in one company typically. So a syndicate will say, we're going to invest in Calm.com. It's a $5 million valuation. Here's the founder. Here's the performance. Go do due diligence if you want. Or you can blindly invest and trust that Jason did his diligence. I don't advise that, but people do it. And you can put in between $1,000 and $50,000. And then you write the check. You wire the money. I handle, as the syndicate lead, the picking of the company and signing off on any decisions for our investment. You don't have to worry about signing documents for them, talking to the founder ever again, the founder knowing who you are, and you're just totally anonymous. Unless you want to, and then you can start talking to the founder and say, I'm an investor through Jason's syndicate, just wanted to check and see if there's any way I can help, and you can uncloak yourself. When you're in a fund, you're an LP, nobody knows who you are again, a limited partner, and you will get a statement typically once a year. Some funds do it twice a year, some do it quarterly, but many of the funds in the US just do it twice a year, once a year. They send an audit, they give it to you, and if you want to, you can open up a PDF and see all the investments they made, and sometimes the names are all like weird corporate names, you don't even know who they are, and you're just trusting, I'm in that fund, and I'm expecting to beat the stock market by 2 or 3x. That's it. And it's a good question. Those are the differences. Any other questions?
One of the nice things about working with Jason is that I'm an LP in his fund, but because of that, I see different syndicate investments. So it gives me the opportunity to add a little bit more money to an idea that I might believe in a little bit more.
Yeah, so we have 99 members of our fund, which was the limit at the time. And it's an $11 million fund that'll invest in like 50, 60 companies. We email our LPs and say, for this every 3 companies, we might syndicate it as well. So if you want to double or triple down, you can. And sometimes they have an affinity. Oh, this is blockable. It's in housing construction. I really care about it. Or it's Cafe X. I love the founder. Or I love the product. I went and tried it. I think this is awesome. And I encourage people to try to develop that signaling. So I am not a fan of the passive investing angel investor. I understand there's people who do spray and pray and passive and FOMA investing. I don't think it's the right way to do it. Would never advise a family member to do it that way. I like for even the syndicate members who don't have to get to know the founder, get to know the product, go through the decision-making process. This way, it's like watching poker on TV versus playing. Like, you can watch it, it's exciting, but there's nothing like playing it, right? Okay.
Just to follow up, Dean McAvoy from Sydney. Just to follow up on the last question, what's the economics for you as the leader of a syndicate? Do you take an extra carry in it? And
Yeah.
then I've got one follow-up question after that as well.
Yeah, great question. It's a 20% carry, just like a fund, but no fees. The only fees on syndicates is, in the States, an $11,000 fee, which goes to keep the LLC active, the limited liability corporation, the corporate entity in the States, for 10 years. We don't get that as the fund manager. That goes to a third-party company like a law firm, accounting firm, that manages sending the tax documents and all that kind of stuff. So we get no fees, we get 20% carry. The downside is we don't know, we can't make a commitment to a founder. We might say, we think we'll do 250, we think there'll be 500 demand, and then 150 shows up, and it takes 2 or 3 weeks to do it. Those are the downsides versus having a fund.
And do you sort of preempt the follow-on so that you can kind of keep your preemptive rights or your
Sure.
pro rata?
So that's the pro rata, which means you keep your percentage ownership, and we'll get to that later. We always offer to our syndicate, our pro rata in this round is 50K. Your pro rata is 500 of the 50K. Would you like to do 0, 500, or more if it's available? And then we'll go to the founder and say, okay, we have 50,000. We have demand for 150,000. Can we get another 100 and go super pro rata? Or there might not be demand, and we'll say, okay, yeah, we took 25 of the 50K. And that can be done in the same SPV, the same entity.
And then
Great question.
a side question, which is just when it came to deciding whether to take money off the table in an angel investment without obviously naming the company, what was the criteria that went through your head of one that you stayed in versus one that you took money off? What was going on in the company? Was there any kind of signals that made you go one way versus the other?
Well, let's imagine, theoretically, that a company was in complete, utter management chaos. You might want to take some of your chips off the table. Let's say if that same company had an existential threat from a technology that would make it go away if a competitor were to perfect that technology, like self-driving. You might want to take some chips off the table. In other cases, if you felt the company was just starting to ramp up and that the best days were ahead of it and it was highly functional and had no competitors, and you knew from your inside information that there were many opportunities for the company to be sold, you might say, you know what, don't need the money, I'll hold. And a lot of deciding to take money off the table has to do with your personal situation in life, like do you need money for an event? Or what I like to think of is, would I buy shares at this price? So if the company was worth 10 billion, would I buy shares in Dropbox at 10 billion? Maybe it's worth 8, I don't know. Well, if it's only worth 8 and it's growing 30% a year or 50% a year, maybe Netflix or Amazon. So I always tell people, put that chance versus other companies. So if I told you, if you were an Airbnb shareholder, Airbnb, do you want to keep your shares in Airbnb? Or would you like to, if I could give you $1 million in Airbnb, $1 million in Amazon, or $1 million in Netflix, which would you take? And you have to hold it for 3 years, because that's when your lockup is up. I don't know if many Airbnb people would hold on to that investment, or if you said you could allocate it however you want, I'm fairly certain people would say split it 3 ways. because you would look at those other opportunities. So you got to look at that investment with fresh eyes, I believe, and say, okay, would I make that investment now with that money? If I had the money in my hand, would I put it back in? Would I hand it back to the company? Or would I hand it to another company? So it really, and then for me, I look at it sometimes and go, you know what? I'm so good at picking young companies that even if this triples over the next 2 years, I could do 300x or 30x if I put it into smaller companies. So I want to put it into other ones. But if you're retiring, there are people who had shares in Google as a private company who still hold them, and they just take loans against that money and sell it. So it's a very personal decision, and it has to do with how much money is in your bank account and what your knowledge base of what the actual ground truth of that company is and what the risks are. Because I saw companies, One Kings Lane, Fab, zeros. And I knew people who were investors in those companies who thought they were worth, as angel investors, $10 million, $20 million. And that was their Uber or their Thumbtack. And they got exactly zero back. Or actually, they got negative 250K back because they invested 250K. Can you imagine that? You invest in Fab or One Kings Lane or any of the other ones that went to, or Theranos. And all of a sudden, your 250 went up to, you invested at a $10 million valuation, it went to 10 billion, and then it went back down to zero, and maybe you're going to get sued by the government. Who knows? The angels don't get sued, typically. Okay, one more question, and then we'll keep moving. We should keep moving.
Hi, Jennifer Zanich, Sydney. Just curious about your insights into syndicates in Australia. So syndicate investing in the US, I imagine, is quite different, given that there's people like you, AngelList, and so on. So what exposure have you got or advice have you got for us looking at similar syndicates
It's nascent. It's a good question. I was speaking to somebody who's running a syndicate or organizing one right now. We had dinner last night with her. And so I think it's nascent. I think there are issues around the cost of maintaining the actual corporate vehicle. And I think it's something where, as angels in the room or high net worth individuals, you can organize together to maybe make some changes with your government and say, hey, look, in the United States, here's how it works. And they're winning, so winning tremendously. You want to go, maybe we need to change it a little bit to be aligned with the winning going on over there. So it's something definitely to look at. Okay, we'll do one more. These are exceptional questions.
Hi, I'm Danny from Sydney. You talk about two approaches to angel investing, financially driven and aspirational driven. On a portfolio basis, is there any data around what's more successful in the longer term?
I don't think so, but I would guess that the aspirational investing is the one that gets you the bigger return over the long run, but also the one that maybe returns zeros, right? I think it's a matter of a bell curve, and the risk that you assume with aspirational investing can get you into 1,000x returns more often than financial investing, but I don't think there's no real actual data out there.
I feel like in Australia, because we are a smaller market, I think we're probably more towards the financial approach. And I think that's because I think the potential growth is smaller, but then I think the probability of success or survivorship is actually higher as well. So it'll be
That's
interesting to see how
exactly
it
the
plays
truth,
out.
right?
Yeah, that is probably accurate. I'll let you know after 2 years of spending time here and what I find what the ground truth is. But one thing to keep in mind, too, is, if you got into Atlassian or Canva, I have a feeling that you're going to be in that couple of 100x range. And those are the two examples, and probably most of you knew about those companies early on. And so the question was, why didn't you fight to get an investment in them if you knew they had massive traction? Really, the cardinal sin of angel investing is missing the big ones, right? When you lose money in an investment, you know exactly what your downside is. When you miss a unicorn or you miss a company that's going to be a legendary company for the rest of your lives, we actually cannot calculate right now what missing Tesla or Netflix or Amazon or Uber or Airbnb. We can't actually calculate what missing a Google investment equals because they're still growing, right? As these companies are becoming legendary, and they'll be probably the companies I just mentioned will be here long after we're gone. It's possible these companies will have 50-year runs like Disney and IBM and other ones. So it's a good question, and I don't have the answer to the market here, which is why I'm here to learn, nor do we have the answer to. It's very opaque what's going on in angel investing, and I think the reason it's opaque is because it's so lucrative. Most people do not want to talk about how much money they've made. The people who've won money, like actually when I wrote the book, there were a lot of people who were kind of like, don't write the book. Don't tell everybody what's going on here. We don't want competition. And in fact, the number one angel of all time, Ron Conway, just got out of the business. He literally retired. And reason given, too many people are investing, too many angel investors. So I was like, okay, that doesn't sound like a good reason. If you're number one, like, it sounds like you're annoyed that there's other people in the game. Like, feels like there's many more great opportunities today. So I found that confusing.
Maybe cold and rich.
Yeah, probably cold and rich. I think that is a better explanation. Okay, let's talk about deal flow.
Yeah. Well, by the way, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can do both. You should just be aware of what you're doing when you're making the investment, right? So let's assume that you've kind of gone through all this kind of emotional baggage and you've decided, yes, I want to be part of this crazy world. How do you get started? And I think the most difficult part is how do you start meeting all the companies, right? I was very lucky. Started attending Jason's conferences. I probably attended for 6 years before I made my first investment, but in my mind, I was doing kind of like fake investing. All right, this is the one I would pick, like fantasy football, right? That's a good example. So I was walking out of each one, actually trying to write down on my iPhone which of the 2 or 3 I would have liked to invest in, so that just to test myself through the process, so I wasn't there for nothing. So startup conferences. One of the great things about going to a startup conference, like the ones that Jason runs, is that from a time perspective, it's very efficient, right? You get to see a lot of companies in 2 or 3 days. That gives you a huge leg up. It can be a bit confusing, right, because you're seeing them so quickly, so you have to do a really good job of taking notes, and I think Jason always advises having a notebook, writing down things. In fact, you and I were having a conversation recently about a regret that you had of not having a Google spreadsheet of everybody that you've spoken to in your career, just to be able to look back from a data perspective, right? Accelerated demo days, which provide that same level of efficiency where you see many companies in a short period of time. That's pretty much a Silicon Valley phenomena, right? YC, who are some of the other ones that run demo days?
500 startups, Techstars, Alchemy, NFX, there's a ton of them, and sometimes these accelerators go away. What I look at accelerators as a great way to meet founders, see how they do on stage. Not a great place to make an investment on the spot. That is a sucker's game. If you're coming to the accelerator, most of the times the top companies have already closed their funding before they get to demo day, because the in-the-know people get to come and be mentors before they graduate. So at Y Combinator, they denied this for a couple of years, but I have the actual facts that, like, a lot of friends of mine were going early, meeting the companies. People were tipping each other off as if this was the breakout company. So then you'd go, and there'd be 100 companies, and the top 5 would be filled. So if there was one unicorn every 100 at Y Combinator historically, it's probably one every 200 they hit. They probably have 6 or 7 out of 1,500 investments. Well, if the top 5 get swept every time, they probably are sweeping out the unicorn. In which case, you're betting in a rigged casino. It's like, you can play at this poker table, but you can't get an ace. It's like, what? I have to win with kings only or queens? It puts you at a significant disadvantage. So what you want to do is meet the companies there and then play the long game, stay in touch with them. One of the great things that has happened is that venture capitalists have moved downstream. And that's a great thing for not founders, but for angels. What it's done is, until the company gets to 5 or 10 million in revenue, VCs in America generally are waiting. Maybe 3 million is the right number. When it gets to 3 million, VCs start really paying attention and putting money in. But they don't invest like they used to. 10 years ago, they would invest in ideas. Now they don't. So look at accelerated demo days or ways to introduce yourself, meet the company, and then you're trying to get the meeting with the company, listen to the founder, get on their monthly update. Most companies in America are sending monthly or quarterly updates now, thanks to a big push and a blog post I wrote about it. In fact, companies now are sending updates to people who pass on investing, which is one of the great. I get more updates every month from companies I said no to than companies I did invest in. It's pretty crazy. Keep going.
Online AngelList, Crunchbase provides great examples of companies. Angel groups you have to be a little bit careful of. In many cities, angel groups are made of people who want to sell to the startups. So it's accountants and lawyers and insurance salesmen, and those people aren't really providing value. And so if you're going to get involved with one of those groups, you want to make sure that there really are angel investors and not just kind of salespeople in disguise. So be careful of kind of if somebody's nodding over there. I guess have you experienced this before?
Yeah. And also, there's a bit of a negative signal with angel groups, because most founders, if they can raise from well-known VCs or angels and syndicates, they would never make it to the angel group. So typically, the people who make it to the angel group, I don't want to say it's the loser brigade, but it's a bit of the loser brigade. And it's also a bit of the lemming investors, because it's the investors who don't have the conviction to meet companies, do the work. It's the lazy or lemming investors who just want to have somebody else make a decision for them. It's your money. You make the decision and live or die with that decision so you can get that signaling in your gut. The worst thing you can do is to say, I'm going to invest in a company because of the 15 people in our angel syndicate, 8 said yes. Now you're just doing groupthink. The best ideas out there are polarizing, whether it's Airbnb or Uber or Google. Google was the 11th search engine. Most people thought that was ridiculous, that the 11th search engine would be the one. Or YouTube was the 200th video site. And Facebook was certainly ridiculous. Like that was the, 30th social network.
So I really think the last one is the most important, and it's the most underestimated. This is a social business. It's a networking business. It's a business where you have to be out there attending meetings, meeting people. When I live in New York. When I go to San Francisco, I love food and wine. I'm a wine collector. I host a dinner typically, and I invite the founders of the companies that I'm invested in, and I suggest to them to invite somebody else they know that might have a startup or might be looking for money. When we came here, we have 5 dinners we've planned this week with Jason to meet local people. And it's those situations that sometimes are the most important in terms of getting you back deal flow. We invested in Contraline through one of Jason's friends who suggested that we meet with them. And that's because probably Jason's top of mind with her. And it's very important for you to think about this in these terms. It's really not something you just kind of do at home while you're on your PC. Most of the hard work is done out and about, at conferences, and staying for the after events.
And here's a very easy hack I talk about in the book. If you've made your first 4 investments through a syndicate or otherwise, just look at that cap table and look at who the other investors are. Then you can email them. Hi, I see we're both investors in Calm.com. I know you're in Melbourne. I'm going to be in Melbourne this week. Wondering if we get a quick coffee, maybe talk about deal flow and where the company's going. So every investment you make automatically makes you brothers and sisters in arms with those other 20 investors. You get to then have an icebreaker with them. We're both in this company. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the next Calm.com. So this is just like a killer technique. Make a spreadsheet, and then if you email, when I was starting my career and I was looking for deal flow, I would just email 20 people and say, who are investors or founders, have you met any interesting founders in the last week or 2? Hit reply and introduce me. And most people didn't respond. But I didn't need most people to respond. I needed 3 or 4 people to respond. I didn't need to have 20 respond. I needed 3 to respond.
Yeah, I think I get a deck a week almost from other angel investors that I know now, and I probably don't even know a tenth as many as Jason knows. I think good angel investors want to share ideas with other people they respect because they want to get your opinion as well to kind of validate themselves. All right, so let's say you've now got deal flow and you have your first meeting set up with somebody. You should try and develop a repeatable process that you go through for those meetings. It's the only way to kind of accurately check yourself on how you're evaluating people, right? Yeah, I think there's sometimes an urge to get a little bit lazy about this process because you hear so many people coming at you. Once you throw angel investor on your LinkedIn profile, you're going to have people coming at you at such an extent that it becomes difficult to manage. So you have to create a discipline around this process and a discipline around first meetings. You should organize a first meeting at a specified amount of time. You should tell the investor what to expect in terms of how much time you're going to give them, what you're going to expect to see at that meeting. And you should do a little bit of research ahead of time, right? Research, if it's a technology that you're not familiar with, learn a little bit about that technology. Read the deck. Write down a couple of questions. And as Jason always says in that kind of first meeting, right, this is really important. Do you want to talk about this a little bit? Because I know you have a really strong
and what I would say
discipline.
is you really want to have a conference room to do this in. Meeting for coffee in a cafe and not having the deck with you and just wrapping out, it's okay, but I consider it kind of amateurish. No offense if that's how you've been doing it. But imagine you're the founder and one person's like, let's grab a coffee, and you're trying to find a table and you got to wait 2 minutes. And now imagine you go to another person, you go into their conference room, whether it's at a co-working space or not. They've got the deck printed out. They have their book. They have their associate with them. And your deck's on the monitor already, and there's a cup of coffee waiting, and 100% of your time is focused on them. And then you want to set the ground rules at the start of the meeting. And so I always give founders an hour. If for some reason my schedule is jammed up and I can only give them 30 minutes, I put in a little an apology at the start. I'm very sorry. If you want to meet this week, I only have a half-hour window. Normally, I like to have an hour, but if that's acceptable to you, we can do the half hour this week, or in 2 weeks, I can allocate a full hour, but I'm going to be away with my family for vacation. So I kind of take a humble approach to it, even though, obviously, the balance of power in the majority of cases resides with the person writing the check. But in the other cases where it doesn't, it's because it's a breakout company. So you want to stay humble in this process. And having some general rules when you start, what I like to do is I take out my phone and I say, how about you run me through the deck for about 15 minutes, assume that I have a pretty high level of knowledge about the basic stuff in the industry and I've already reviewed the deck, and then maybe I can ask you some questions and you can ask me some questions. Does that work for you? Then they nod and say, okay. Or they say, would you like me to show you the product? I'm like, if you think that's better, you could show me the product since I've reviewed the deck. Sure. So I like to have that little establishing moment. And then what I do is I take my phone, and this is a power move. I say, let me turn my phone off so I can give you my complete attention. And I'm just going to set a timer for 20 minutes just in case. And then I put my phone in my bag or off the table. I open my book, my Moleskine with my pen. And then I pretend that this is the most important person in the world I'll ever meet. And I give them the full attention I have. Because this might be the next Uber. This might be the next Airbnb. And you want to be open to that possibility. I can't tell you how many times as a founder I've been in a meeting and seen an investor distracted. I was in a very famous venture capitalist office, and some jerk-off VC looked at it, this is 10 years ago, started looking at his BlackBerry. And there were 3 or 4 partners in the room. There were 6, 7 people in the room total, 2 or 3 from our side, 3 or 4 from theirs. And I looked at them, and I stopped talking. And his partner went. And he said, oh, I'm sorry. And it was, obnoxious that this person would stop the founder to do that. Now, most founders don't have the leverage to do that. At that point, I was oversubscribed, so I was just so infuriated. Most founders would not do something as crazy as I would in that situation. I realize I'm a unique individual. Most founders would just look and say, these people are idiots. They don't even have the courtesy to pay attention in a meeting. So don't be that guy. Be the person who is present and who cares deeply. And you want to have a list of questions. You want to take notes. And, of course, be clear on what the next step is. In terms of questions, we get into questions here on the next slide, I think. Yeah. So we'll go.
Well, I think, it's also one of my experiences is that sometimes founders don't explain their idea very well. And it's very easy early in a meeting to kind of write it off. Jason has a new mantra lately that he's been talking about, which is don't underestimate anyone. And I think sometimes what you have to do is slow the founder down and say, explain this to me again because I don't get it, and give them that opportunity. You'll only do that if you're really listening. And if you're not listening, or if you're distracted, or if you kind of in the first 5 minutes say, this is a stupid idea, how can I get rid of this person really, really quickly, you're making a mistake. Because the idea that somebody's a successful founder and a good pitcher are 2 different things. And sometimes they're correlated, like Jason when he was younger. Sometimes they're inversely correlated. But you have to drive down. The other thing is, don't be embarrassed to ask questions. This was a mistake I made early on, and watching Jason, sometimes you don't understand what the heck they're talking about. It's a technology you're not familiar with. They're throwing out an acronym. It's okay for you to say, I don't understand what you're saying. What do you mean by that? Explain it again. Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. And really force them to make you understand the idea so that you can really, really appreciate it.
When I have people in meetings with me who are on my team, they know going in that if they don't know a word or an acronym, they should ask what that is. And a couple of times, I'll call my own team out and I'll say, okay, stop for a second. Damon, do you know what KYC is? And he said, no, I don't. I said, okay, make sure you make sure you ask next time. It's know your customer. And then I'll ask the founder, can you explain to Damon why know your customer is important? It's like, oh, yeah, so you don't take money from ISIS. Okay, great. Let's keep moving. A lot of times, here's a power move for you. I'll ask questions I know the answer to. This is a move I learned as a journalist. A lot of times you're a journalist, you're talking to somebody, and talking to Elon Musk about something. If you were a journalist interviewing, you say, so why are your batteries better? Or how come battery life hasn't grown faster? Well, Elon Musk's answer to that and how he explains it could be a really great, for the journalist, story, But it could also, and he might give up something incredible, but it might be for you as the investor amazing because you might actually realize this person is brilliant. They have an incredible way of looking at the market, and it makes you smarter. So asking questions you know the answer to and asking basic questions, why is that important? It's like we're going to make our own batteries. Why? Or why is that important? Or why are you making your own batteries? I'm curious. Short questions. You're not in the meeting to show off your expertise. You're in the meeting to let them talk. And when you let the Mustangs run and they're running up and down the hill, it's just glorious. Like you can start to really see like, oh my God, this person is smart. This person understands. They're motivated. So ask those simple questions and just let them run. Now, if you get 5-10 minutes into the meeting and you're like, this person's a dipshit, I would never invest in them. They're obnoxious. They're never going to succeed at anything in life. How do I get out of this meeting? Just say to yourself, this is an opportunity for me to build a relationship and have this person go to other founders and say I gave them the full hour and that I was the best meeting they ever had. I look at every meeting and say, what will that person say when they go back to a mailing list of 20 other founders or when they talk to 10 founders about what was it like to meet with Jason Calacanis? I want them to say I asked the best questions, I listened the most, I took the most notes, and I was the most courteous, and I had the best chocolate. I put $8 or $9 chocolate bars in our dish, and I hand everybody a Dandelion chocolate bar from the Dandelion Chocolate Company in San Francisco because I want them to remember. And when they don't have a Moleskine book with them or whatever, they need a pen, you'll see my chief of staff or my special projects person run out a brand new Moleskine and hand them a Moleskine and a pen. Now, this is a $15 book. What do I care? I'm rich. But I give them the Moleskine, and they're like, this is a Moleskine. But for me, that's marketing. How you behave in that meeting is your marketing of your brand. You're not buying a billboard as an angel investor. You're building advocates. And how you treat the people you're passing on is as important as how you treat the people you invest in.
So here are the questions. And I think the first thing is you want to make sure you clearly understand what the product is. Not every founder does this well, and this might take the first 5 minutes of the meeting. You might ask them to explain it a few different ways. You might ask them to clarify terminology, but it's really clear that you have kind of a 10,000-foot view of what it is the company does. The second item you want to cover is where is the product? This is what they lie about the most, right? They use vague words, and you really have to kind of drill down a little bit. Is have you sold this to anybody where they've actually paid you any money for this? Generally, you'll hear no. But up to that point, they'll kind of make it seem like, yeah, it's already a market, I've already got it. But it's pretty common that founders feel like they want to trick you into thinking that the product is further ahead than it is, even though you probably really don't care. You just want the honest answer, and to some extent, they're wasting the time, but don't hold it against them. I find in over 50% of the meetings I've ever been in, this is the case. There's always something a little bit less than what they're pretending to be.
Yeah, this speaks to traction, so I'll just give you an actual story. So what's your traction like? Well, we have $200,000 in revenue. I'm like, you have $200,000 in revenue. That's amazing. This year, last year, this quarter, this month, this week. And they're like, oh, this month. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. How many customers you have? We have 4,000. I'm like, 4,000 divided into 200,000. Okay, so your product is $50 per person? And they're like, no, it's $500 a person. I'm like, oh, so you gave some discounts? They're like, no, but we're not charging yet. I'm like, but you have 200,000 in revenue this month. It's like, yeah, well, we just got paid. We had done a custom software project for one of our customers. That was $200,000 because they wanted kind of like a white label thing. And then we've had 4,000 people sign up for our product hunt page. And then of those 2,000 created accounts. I'm like, so you have 4,000 emails. You have 2,000 people who've signed up, who've actually logged in and used the product. And you have one person who paid you $200,000 for custom software. That means nothing. And I was sitting here thinking, oh my God, these people have got the flywheel cranking. They had nothing cranking. Anybody can get a $200,000 software development job. That's not what we're doing here. So unpacking that traction is very important. And people will call users or email accounts customers. Customers pay money. And so you don't have to do it in an accusatory way. You just have to do it like Columbo. Anybody ever? Do you guys get Columbo? Okay, good. I didn't know if he made it down here. I just play the Columbo. Oh, yeah, ma'am, you said you went for Italian on the night of the murder. and you ordered the fettuccine Alfredo. I love that dish, but my wife tells me, I got to lose 20 pounds. I can't have that fettuccine Alfredo. But I talked to the chef. He said they haven't had fettuccine Alfredo in like 6 months. He lost the Parmesan cheese guy. And he doesn't want to make it without that good Parmesan cheese. Well, I'm a nudge sometimes. And I just ask it like that. Just super simple questions. You have 2,000 customers into the, 4,000 customers, you said, in 200,000 in revenue. So I think it's like a 500 or 50 or $5. I never got it down. $50 per person, per month, or per year. And then all of a sudden the truth comes out. So I'm playing stupid. I'm asking very basic questions. And so to Mike's point with that first point, clear ability to define the product or service. Who is your customer? Is it the advertising agency, or is your customer the brand? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, so you're selling your software to Coca-Cola and to BBDO? No, we sell to BBDO. Okay, great. Perfect. Now, and you have to really try to figure this stuff out. Again, to Mike's point, which I think is a really great way to say it, sometimes the ability to explain this stuff, they're so close into it and they're so in the muck, they can't explain it to people not in their industry. Keep going.
What was the inspiration for the idea? I like this question a lot because I think what you'll find is for the more successful companies, the person was trying to solve a problem very personal to themselves, right? Travis at Uber, right? I think he even said his family was involved in car services at some point, but he was out in Paris, I think.
Yep.
You tell the story, right?
Yeah, Garrett Camp and Travis were in Paris and they couldn't get a cab. They were at Louis conference. And they were like, this doesn't make any sense. We have GPS on our phones. Boom.
I think when you meet a founder and you ask them what was the inspiration, and they say, well, I decided I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I sat down with my friends and I thought about what could make a lot of money, that can be a little bit of a red flag to me because the idea that you start with, I want to make a lot of money, generally isn't the same kind of idea thought process that leads to the unicorns. Usually it's about solving a major problem that somebody's identified. Very often it's very personal to them in some way, and it's a passion project for them. And they're going to be so committed to the success of this venture that a person who's just doing it for the money maybe kind of will give up at a certain point.
If you want to make money, a startup as a founder is not your best option. Like literally learning some obscure technology and then selling yourself to the highest bidder for $500,000 or $1 million a year in stock options in Silicon Valley, whether it's Apple. Like if you really want to start a company and you're got that level of knowledge, like if you want to be an AI scientist or a self-driving person, self-driving car programmer, or product manager, you can make $1 million, $2 million a year. And if you add that up over 10 years, it'll be more money than you'll get building a $100 million company, and it's 100% guaranteed and you can sleep at night. So what I find is the people who are doing it for the money, when all of a sudden they realize exactly how hard this is, they wake up and they're like, this isn't worth it. I quit. And I don't know if anybody else has had this experience. I've had founders who run out of money, and I'm like, oh, you're out of money? And they're like, yeah, but I told everybody we're out of money. I told everybody I might be able to get them this month's salary next month, and we're very close to getting some funding, so I think we're going to be okay. And I'm just like, I love you. And then I meet other people that are like, we shut the company down. I'm like, when? They're like, 4 months ago. I'm like, 4 months ago? You said you had 8 months of revenue, 8 months of runway. You say, yeah, but we gave everybody 4 months severance, and then we paid our lawyers, and then, so we're going to return 10 cents on the dollar. I'm like, did you try and sell the company? They're like, we did, and we got an offer that would have returned our investors money, but we would have had to work at Google for like 2 years. And I mean, they were going to pay us like $500,000 each, but I don't want to work. I talked to the team. We don't want to work at Google for 2 years. It's a terrible deal. I'm like, but you could have got us our money back and made us whole. I'm sorry we put you out. It's like, now you know that's the person you don't invest in.
Market size, I think, don't fall for the trap of the total addressable market. Statistics around total addressable market are often inaccurate and difficult to confirm. Try and have them describe how they can ramp up the company and sell units to get to a revenue size. That is a much more difficult, but also a much more thoughtful exercise to force them through.
We call that bottom-up market sizing as opposed to top-down. So let's say you sold into pharmacists, and you were in Australia. You say, there are this many pharmacists in Australia, and We believe that at $50 per seat for this enterprise software company, if we got all of them, we would make this amount of money. However, a number of them work for the government and for the military, therefore those are out. So it's actually 70% of that number, and we think we can get half of them if we become the industry standard. And it's a winner-take-most market, as opposed to pharmaceuticals in Australia are a $1 trillion industry. And it's like, that's the cost of Viagra and opioids. That you don't get that money. You're building software for the pharmacist. You're not actually getting the cost of the medicine. And people just pull this crazy Gartner Group report and they pretend that that's the actual real number. It's insane. Keep going.
Use of funds, I think this is something that you shouldn't spend a lot of time on, but you want to get an idea of where the money is going to go and whether the person has had kind of left things out or has a thoughtful process around it. And the final thing is who are the other investors? For me, most importantly, who's the lead investor? Because as an angel investor, we're going to talk about a lot of things later on around terms, but quite frankly, unless you're the lead investor, you really can't move the needle very much on where things like initial valuation are going to be. And investing alongside people like Jason or Chamath Palihapitiya or somebody that you know has a strong track record of success and who you also know has the ability to do a lot more due diligence than even you can do can be really, really helpful.
And asking them where you know that person from. So sometimes you'll say, oh, Chamath invested or this person invested. How much? Oh, they put in 50K? Did they put it in personally or from their fund? Oh, they put it in personally. Oh, why didn't they put it in from their fund? Well, Chamath and I were roommates. Or I knew Chamath's brother, and it's like, oh, that's Chamath giving $50,000 to get you to go away. And he doesn't want to give his LPs money, but he's just trying to literally get you away from him at Thanksgiving, that he gave you the $50,000 to burn. Like, sometimes you do get that. And then also, they'll tell you they have $600,000 of the $750,000 closed, and it's soft-circled, or it's, so I actually preempt them with my own definition. Of the $750,000 you're raising, how much is in the bank? How much do you have a signed document for, but don't have the wire, and how much is soft-circled? And they're like, it's all soft-circled. Like literally, because I've been through this exercise so many times with them, that I don't even go through it anymore, because it's a bit of a, like, it's kind of like a Shakespearean dirt, or like, it always ends the same, like it's tragedy. It's like, just tell me the truth. And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, no, we had a $500,000 lead, they wired immediately, and then I've got 5 $20,000 checks. I haven't even sent them their documents yet, because I think I might be able to get you to put in 250, boom. Who priced the round is a good one, right? So I'm sure we'll get to talking about valuation, but who priced the round is a critically important one. I've been in meetings and I say, okay, oh, you're raising $1 million, it's $10 million valuation. Who's pricing the round? And they're like, you. I'm like, well, I literally had somebody say that. I was like, well, I don't know if I put 10 million on the value of this company. Okay, keep going.
Red flags in the first meeting. The first one, we're the X of Y. We're the Uber of sailboats. We're the Facebook for kindergarten. If that's the best description you can get for a business, that's a red flag that somebody really tried to copy another idea into a different space, which generally doesn't really work. The one I hear the most is we have no competition. If you can go on AngelList or Crunchbase and tell them, here are 4 companies that are doing what you're doing, and then they say, well, yeah, we kind of knew about them, but they're doing it slightly differently, that's also somebody who's either being a little bit disingenuous or doesn't know what Google is, right? And that's a real problem.
Or downright lying.
Right. We need to know right away. As Jason said, this is a process that you will dictate on your terms and on your time frame, which should be not exceedingly long, but you have to be comfortable with it. And if somebody says that to you, you have to say, well, if I miss out, I miss out, but I'm going through my process. My personal experience is you'll never be locked out because of that. It's usually just kind of bullshit, and they'll take your money when you're ready to say yes.
There's always another round, too. Most of these companies go through 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds before they have their Series B. So that means as a seed investor, you can invest up through the Series A in all likelihood. So no reason to worry in my mind. And you don't have to be in every deal. You could hit one of the future ones. If you did miss one, people who missed Facebook and hit Google or missed YouTube and hit Instagram, you only need one is basically what I can tell you.
This next point should say overly argumentative founder. I think all founders are argumentative to some extent by their nature, but when you bring up a good point and they just want to insist that you're wrong about it, or just seem to be fighting you on points that don't seem salient to whether or not you would invest, this is a person that you're going to have to work with and you're going to spend a lot of time with. Hopefully you'll spend the next 10 years with them. You should be a little bit careful about that. lack of market statistics. This is personally a big one for me. I like to invest in founders who, when they're speaking about their business, are teaching me something. They have the statistics at their fingertips. They know things about the number of people or the number of companies that could potentially purchase the product. And I find that personally to be really important.
I'll give you an example. As I was in a meeting the other day, and I've been looking at this faux meat space, like Impossible Burger is making a burger that's not made out of meat, but it's quite tasty, Beyond Meat, etc. And I was saying to one founder who was making a mock meat in a slurry lab with science, and I was like, so does the Impossible Burger make any money? They're like, no, I know somebody who worked there, and I know one of the investors, and they've raised $40 million. So basically, they're losing a couple of dollars per hamburger, but they think that they'll cross at a couple, maybe 3 or 4 years in, they'll be able to figure out, get the cost down, but it's these amino acids that they're using, whatever. It was a big, long explanation, and I was just like, wow, thank you for educating me, and you know stuff. A lot of times I'll ask people, so how much money has your competitor, and who are their investors? And they're like, yeah, maybe it's on Crunchbase. I'm like, maybe it is on Crunchbase. Or, like, this is like somebody
Want me
be
to look
like,
it up for you?
who are you going to war with? And how many nukes do they have? And how many fighter planes they have? I don't know, but we're going to run across the border any minute. It's like, you might want to know what you're running into.
Why don't you talk about the last one?
Well-
That's a good experience.
Yeah, a couple of times people have said I was committed to a deal and I had never met them. I recently got a deck sent to me, and somebody said to me, and I tweeted it because I had no choice. This person circulated a deck that said I was an advisor, and by advisor they mean they attended an event that I hosted, and they were doing like equity crowdfunding site, and they're like had a full page slide with me and 3 other like pretty high profile people in Silicon Valley, advisors, and my friend was like, oh, I'm thinking about putting money in that thing you're doing. I'm like, what thing? The equity crowdfunding thing. I'm like, Republic or Seed Invest? Because they're partners with me on my events, but I'm not an investor in any of them. They're like, no, the other one. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. They forwarded me the deck. I see my picture in there. And I was like, oh my God, this is securities fraud. It's literal securities fraud. You're making a representation, selling equity, and it's not true. So one of the great things to do is to do an off-list reference check. What that means is they list their previous investors. Who's not on the list? Oh, I'm an investor. You find out on Crunchbase or in a press release that I invested, but I'm not on their deck. Maybe something went wrong. So you shoot me an email. Hey, Jason, I see you're an investor in this company according to Crunchbase. Have 5 minutes? I did this one time. When I started to get more serious about angel investing, I started doing these off reference list checks, which means off the list of references they give you. Some people call them backdoor. Some people call them, what's the other word, Brian? There's another word for these. Do you know anyway, people are starting to do this. They're being very popular to do reference checks that aren't on the list that were given to you. And I emailed a friend of mine, and I was like, hey, just met with this company that you invested in. Got time for a quick call? And in less than 60 seconds, one of the highest profile people in the industry is calling my mobile phone. So I was like, oh, that was fast. Oh, you must love the founder. They're like, it's a complete and utter fraud. Don't put your money in it. I'm in the middle of a lawsuit. This is incredibly dangerous. This person is a sociopath. And I was like, thanks. I'll see you next week for dinner. Bye. Like, literally. So don't be afraid to do those reference checks. And that's part of the job. So if you're going to put $25,000 into a company, I think, earmark 10 hours of work, 10 hours of work seems reasonable to me. 1 hour of preparing to meet them, 1 hour in the meeting, 1 or 2 hours after you meet with them to think about it, maybe do a little more research, maybe a second meeting with them. Now you're 2 meetings in, you're about 5, maybe then you're going to you got the documents, you read the documents another hour, and then maybe you do 2 or 3 hours of due diligence. That would be like a super comprehensive process.
So another piece of bad advice that we've heard centers around demo days. And there can be a lot of pressure if you attend them to invest that day. That's a huge mistake, right? You are putting money into something for an idea where you're trying to figure out if it's going to work. You should at least sleep on it. But we do know that some other organizations feel like you're a bad, or will label you as a bad investor if you don't do this. This is extremely bad advice. If you don't sleep on it, you're making a mistake, right?
Yeah, and this is advice specifically from Y Combinator's CEO. And I can tell you this advice is so horrible that it is only given in the interest of their equity in the companies which they've already secured in a bargain deal. They get 6% for 100 or so thousand. So they're incentivized for you to blindly put money in because they've already got their 6% at a price that is literally 1/5 of what you're going to pay. So remember, the advice that you're getting here from the CEO of Y Combinator is advice they paid 15 cents, 20 cents on the dollar, 10 cents on the dollar to what you're paying. So it's a pump and dump scam. You shouldn't think. You should just put money in. The great investors move quickly and shut up. That is the opposite of reality. The great investors engage their startups. They spend time with their founders. They think and consider the deals they do because, again, you're spending 10 years. This advice would be the equivalent of saying, if you meet somebody at the dance, marry them. It's like, you probably wouldn't tell your brother or sister, like, hey, yeah, the first person you meet at the dance, put a ring on it. Not how it works. Take your time. It is like a marriage. You want to get to know the person. And when it comes to argumentative people, in the previous slide we talked about, people who are founders are self-selecting into a group of people who are charismatic leaders and who have a specific version of the world that they want to see change. And the more audacious the idea, I think the more they're going to skew towards extreme personalities. So argumentative about certain details could be this person is incredibly considered and they understand that, this deal point matters a lot. But then there are some people who are argumentative to the point of it, you can tell that they argue for the sake of arguing. If you've ever been an employer and everybody in the company signs the same employment package, including you, and then somebody comes and they're like, oh yeah, no, I got the employment package, I sent it to my lawyer, and we changed the assignment of IP to be valid in this city, and I have a concern about this and this, and you're like, okay, but you're coming here and you're a junior sales rep, and you really think we're going to change the documents, but this happens, and you're like, this person has just opted out of being an adult. Like, it's your first job or second job. You're not coming here like to be a patent, you're a patent owning scientist working for Google, and you need to have your T's crossed and your I's dotted.
Yeah, never feel the pressure to invest, whether it's coming from a founder or it's coming from an organization like an incubator. Founder characteristics. You might invest in somebody for a lot of different reasons. There can be some kind of empathetic response you have to who they are. They might remind you of somebody that they like, but you should stop and think about really what makes somebody successful. And there's a certain level of commitment, I think, and a certain level of persistence. And for me personally, an ability to iterate on an idea. They don't see mistakes. They just see problems to be solved and are going to narrow down the problem and go through. Do you have some favorites, Jason?
Well, I believe the reason most startups fail is because the founder gives up. Whether they're coming to work every day and they've mentally given up and spiritually given up on the company, or they literally just give up and go to Coachella. It's a music festival in America. So I like resiliency as my number one. The ability to be focused and hardworking, that's also great. And some of these, like passion and even temperament, these things, the same person could have both of them. But commitment, super important. That goes to resiliency. And there's different types. Some people only want to invest in a technical founder. Some people are ageist and they believe like the big outlying ideas come only from young people like Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or whatever. And then it's like, well, Elon Musk, Mark Pincus, and other people had their success on their third startup. Travis, third startup. Elon, third startup. Mark Pincus, third or fourth startup. So there is a big debate about certain signaling. Some people might say men versus women, certain races or demographics, certain colleges or not. I think that none of that matters. What matters is how much the person wants to see this product exist in the world, i.e. their passion, their commitment and their resiliency, and then their skills. So I look at what have they built so far? And as I've gone on as an angel investor, we have something we've defined as the zone where we like to invest. We call it the Goldilocks zone. Not too hot. Do you guys have this in Australia, the porridge story?
Yeah, I had it this morning.
You had it this morning. Okay, and it was too hot. And you waited for it to cool down, and that doesn't happen with startups, or it was too cold and you had to put it back in the microwave. So too cold, I have an idea for me. That's too cold. Too cold for me is I built an MVP. I'll meet you, I'll look at it. To me, the product's in the market, it's a beta, it's been out for 6 months or 12 months, and you have some data or traction for us to talk about. Too hot for me? We just closed our Series B, or we've got 5 term sheets for our Series A at an overpriced valuation. So I like to get in between those two zones. You can define for you what you like. For new angels in the room, I would advise you when you're starting out, well, do you really think that if 70% of startups fail, you should invest when people have ideas? Because, by the way, 70% of those people are never going to get their idea to market. They're never going to finish. So you might as well start only investing in companies that get their product to market for when you're starting. Now, if you get sophisticated and you have a good gut and you meet somebody who worked at Google or Atlassian or Canva and they were the real superstar there and they have a new idea based on what they learned there and they have 2 people who are leaving NASA to come join them, and you might say, you know what, I'm going to take a flyer. It's a $3 million valuation. I'll give them the first 100,000. I just have a feeling. You can do that. And you can be their champion and put the first money in before they have the product based on their track record. But I like to see people have a little bit greater chance of success. So, and most companies can get their products to market on 25, 50K, or get their first customers for 100 when they're at 150K in spend, 250, and that can be done with sweat equity. Basically, it means 1 developer, 1 designer, 1 salesperson. So if a person can't put together that that core team, what does that say about the person? I've met many founders who are like, I need you to give me $250,000 so I can go hire a developer. I'm like, well, why don't you find a developer as your co-founder? They're like, yeah, no, every developer I meet doesn't want to come work for me. It's like, wow, there's a ringing endorsement of why I should give you $250,000. So the only way you can get somebody to do your idea is by paying them off. What do you think happens when they run out of money? It can be back to you to get more money, and it's just a road to nowhere.
Yeah, and I think going along with that theme, this concept of frugality is a new thing that we've added to this slide. At one point, there was so much money out there that people almost didn't really have to be frugal, but what we see now is those companies that can bootstrap themselves to a certain degree are being far more respected in getting investments.
And
So
frugal's different than cheap.
Right.
It's like frugal is like optimizing to get the most out of every dollar, not being afraid to spend money.
So now you've had that first meeting. What you want to do is go back and really dive into the idea and do the research. This can be 1 hour, it can be 4 hours. You really have to decide how much time you want to spend yourself in this process. But I think there's an opportunity here for you to sleep on the idea, formulate some thoughts, do a bunch of research, check the statistics that you're being told, determine whether you can find a competitor if they told you there are no competitors whatsoever, and prepare for a second meeting where you go more deeply into the Columbo thing that Jason spoke about, but with really direct questions. My dad was a New York City police detective, so I think I learned interrogation coming home late at night too often, drinking. But I do think this idea of, at that point, being direct, and this doesn't have to be kind of a surprise attack. You can say to them, hey, here's a set of questions I'm going to ask you. Let's sit down and talk, and give them the opportunity to go back and research them. But this second meeting is really the most important one, I think, because you don't want to drag them through 10 or 15 meetings. They probably don't have the attention span, and at some point, they're going to write you off as a waste of time. Because there are a lot of people who will drag founders through 10 and 12 meetings and never get to say yes. And I think they're all watching out for that person, and you don't want that reputation to be that person. But this is really your time to kind of come back with all the salient points that you need to know to say yes or no.
Yeah, and what I like to do is anything that's a fact in that first meeting, you can underline or circle as something to check later. And in the book, I detail a couple of stories where I had somebody who told me they had a contract with Google and a contract with Facebook. During diligence, I asked my chief of staff, check the contract. And they said in both cases, oh, it was an oral agreement. I was like, okay, with whom? And they said, well, we met them both at parties, and they said they were interested in doing a pilot. So I'm like, you told me you had Google and Facebook as customers, and you don't even know the last name of the person you talked to. Like, wow. And now it's not always going to be that crazy, but also seeing the cap table. Now, if you're a syndicate investor, you may not get the cap table or whatever. But if you're putting in 50,000 or 25,000, like, hey, yeah, can you send the cap table, send the note? I'm going to have my lawyer review and take a look. Asking about the vesting schedule. Are you vesting? Are you fully vested? This is important because maybe not for you as an angel, you don't mind if they're half vested and they've got 2 years left on their vesting. But what if the VCs who come later if they're fully vested, they've got all their shares as founders, the VC is going to ask them to reset that and start vesting again and do another 4-year vest. So I like to have that conversation early on with people. I have people come to my incubator fully vested. And I say, we'll accept you to the incubator. We just want you to fix this. And here's the reason we want you to fix this. Downstream investors will disqualify you. If you can't get venture money, then our angel investment shouldn't have been made. We only want to invest in people who can have venture scale. Therefore, understand, we're letting you know that it doesn't matter to us all that much, but it will matter deeply to them.
Going back to accelerators, so there are, this is an opportunity. You should understand what the deal the accelerator has with that founder. Jason mentioned before that some of them can be a little bit onerous. Coming out of them, your valuations will typically be a little bit higher, and we'll show later on why that initial valuation maybe really affects your decision to some extent. But this is, as we mentioned before, from a deal flow perspective, this is a place that is to some extent necessarily evil that you have to go and kind of find out, right?
Yeah, and here what we're saying is most of the incubators take 4% for the cost of their program. Now you might say, wait a second, I thought it was 6%. It is 6%. If they're putting in 100,000, and if they had you put a $5 million valuation on the company, that 100,000 is paying for 2 points, 50,000 per point approximately. That means they're getting the other 4 points in kind. Or so if you valued the company at 3 million, then they're getting 3 points in kind. For a founder, they have to decide, does Y Combinator, Techstars, or Jason's program, Launch Incubator, do those programs make my company 3 or 4% more valuable? In those 3 cases, I would say almost universally it does, if the person actually puts some effort into the program. Or even if you just said, I went to Y Combinator, LaunchStars, or Techstars, it probably would make your company 3% more valuable, even if you didn't go to the program, candidly, because people look at those as signaling because they have filtering. Some of your companies you invest in will want to go to an accelerator and then ask you to sign a waiver. And then you have to, now you're becoming a gatekeeper, right? And this is under the MFN, Most Favored Nation rules. In your documents when you invest, you probably want to have MFN, and you probably want to ask, does anybody else have a side letter? And if there is a side letter, we just need to be aware of it. A side letter is an agreement that one investor might have that's not in the investment documents. We have side letters that say if we own over 5%, we get a board seat, as an example. We have side letters that say we have information rights and we expect a monthly update. Most investors do not require those things. We do because we want to help companies succeed, and we believe that these 2 items will help them succeed. So we have those side letters. MFN just means if you're going to give a better deal to somebody, let us know. We want that same deal. So I've had companies literally use my name to invest at a $5 million valuation, then offer somebody else an equal number of shares as advisors. And so they put 100K and I put 100K, and they get 5%, I get 2.5%. And they give them advisor shares. Now, if that person is legitimately an advisor who's putting in extra work and I'm not, that's fine. But I would like to know about it. So I've had companies that have invested and want to go to Y Combinator or Techstars afterwards, and I usually say, Mazel Tov, go. I think it's worth it because it will increase the value. Just like they're deciding, will this increase the value of the company for the founder? I believe it will increase it for me. But if they went to I had one that tried to go to an incubator that asked for 40% of the company on signing to give them desks and advice. It was, I'll tell you the name of the company. It was a company called Science in Los Angeles, and their model is they come up with the ideas, and they're like, yeah, this company's not worth anything. We'll save it. We'll take 40%. Then it was 25%, and then the company wound up getting ground into the ground, which is what I predicted. But I told my founders, don't work with Science. These terms are ridiculous, and it's a negative signal. So you have to then understand when some of these things are outliers or not. I'm not sure what the incubators here offer or take, but it should be somewhere in the range of maybe double on a small number of what they would pay in cash, but not 10x. That's a little bit ridiculous.
So here are a list of a number of kind of pitfalls or mistakes that you can make early on in your career as an angel investor. I think there's probably more things you can do wrong than you can do right. Most of the companies that you invest in will fail. That's part of the process. That's part of what you want to understand. The last bullet point is the one I really want you to take away, which is I think you need to build a CRM-like process. You need to document all your meetings, kind of try and remind yourself why you invested and why you didn't invest, more importantly, in every company that you met with, so that you can build your own little database of your trends, of what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. Most people don't do this. I don't think I've done it. You admitted to me that you didn't do it necessarily early on. So we're trying to give you some advice for people that made that mistake. But you can see there's lots of reasons here why an investment will fail, or why you could make a mistake. Never invest in an uncapped note is one that I want to bring to your attention. There's no reason, if you can't get a valuation, you could just invest in the next round then at that valuation. So there's no reason to do that on any investor or any founder that's asking you for that. I think you can just move on. So that's the end of that section. Why don't we open the floor for some questions?
And I'm going to grab a bottle of water. Can you pass me one of those big bottles? And if somebody from my team has a ice cold Coke Zero, I wouldn't not take it. Or an iced tea, ice cold iced tea even. Extra ice. Thanks.
Just a question around what sort of pre-qualification do you guys do in terms of not getting the wrong type of founders coming to you, businesses that you're not interested
I
in?
have a really easy way to do this. When people ask to meet with me, I say, oh my God, thank you for reaching out to me. I really appreciate it. For efficiency's sake, I don't want to waste your time. Can you answer a couple of questions by email before we meet, before we set up a meeting? 1, is the product launched? 2, what's the traction like? 3, do you have a deck? 4, what's the ask? Are you raising a round? And then they'll answer those questions. And then I'm just looking to see how considered those answers are. Again, back to the Columbo metaphor, I want to just see if they're thorough. Or I had people I've asked those 4 questions to respond 4 weeks later. And I'm like, well, I guess this is an important meeting. Other people will write me like 4-page answers to each of the 4 questions. And I'm like, well, that's ridiculous as well. And other people write short, concise answers, and they respect it. And then very rarely have I had people say, happy to answer these questions for you in person. And I'm like, all right, well, now you're just not being respectful of my process. Like, I explicitly said this is to save time. So what are you working on? But even before I ask those questions, I just look at what their domain is. At Gmail, okay. Oh, at company name, good. I click on the company name. Then I type in company, and then I cut and paste it into Google. Then I type their name, space, competitors. I'll do this before I respond to the email. Because I like something, I like to be in a situation where there's information asymmetry. I want them to not know that I know a lot about them going into the meeting. So before I meet with people, my chief of staff and my special projects manager will email me dossiers. You've heard this word before, the dossier? Dossiers of people. Now, I'm not trailing people, but I will get the LinkedIn, I'll get the company they worked at, how much money they've raised, the competitors, and then I get it on my phone for efficiency. I'll be in the Uber on the way to the meeting, and click, 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 click. I'm just looking at it. I'm looking, oh, they went to Fordham. Oh, we know these people in common. LinkedIn, obviously. Then I'll look at their social media. Then I'll search their social media account. I'll just check everything, just so I come into the meeting knowing more. And I'm not going to bring all that up. I just let them talk. Let the Mustangs run. That's what I always say is like, don't interrupt the founder. Let them talk. Because a lot of times, like in the Columbo, once you get the subject talking, boom, you get the answers you need. And you may get answers to questions you didn't even think of asking. So that's my best advice.
But I do think you will wind up meeting, you have to kiss a lot of frogs, right? You'll have meetings that you feel like you wasted your time, and he has a staff that will build a dossier. You might not have that. And I do think you can't be deterred by the fact that most of the meetings you take, you'll say no to.
And when you're starting your career, you have time. So take the meetings, and never underestimate anybody. Every time I meet somebody, when we break, 10 people will come up and talk to me. I just give them my complete attention. I ask them what they're working on. I think deeply about it. And I just think to myself, what if they're the person that introduces me to the next Robinhood? Because maybe they're not underestimating somebody. And you just never know where that next life-changing investment. And most investors I know have between 1 and 5 life-changing investments that are 99% of their returns.
Hi, my name is Javed Jameh. I'm from San Francisco. I'm mentoring currently at a few different accelerators and incubators. And
Y Combinator?
No.
Okay.
So I'm.
It's a friendly rivalry.
So I have a number of startups that have asked me to be an advisor, and a few that I'm interested in potentially investing in. Is it ever advisable to negotiate my time as an advisor as part of or in lieu of monetary
We
investment?
have a slide on that.
We have a slide coming up, but the
Okay.
answer is yes, and we'll get to it. But advisorships is how I started my career. I would have so little money to put in. I put 10K in and get 25 or 50 basis points. So I think it's totally fine. If you're coming up and you're a broke angel, sure, why not?
Thanks. Abby Bloom, Sydney. You referred a couple of different ways and times to how important the temperament, and I would say the manageability of a founder is. Steering clear of sociopaths. You had a whole list of desirable qualities in a founder. I guess my question is, do you similarly have a systematic or, I don't know, methodical approach to vetting founders, and particularly to find those who you're only going to really understand whether or not they're investable sometimes after you've put the money in?
Yeah, you're not going to be perfect. You're not a psychologist. You're not giving them a personality test. And the truth is, the sociopathic extreme personalities can have enormous returns. I'm being candid. Sometimes it's the people who are the rule breakers and difficult to understand at times, and who think quixotically, who change the world, whether it's Steve Jobs or Travis, Elon Musk. And then there are people who are straight up frauds. Elizabeth Holmes comes to mind from Theranos. And I'm not using the word sociopathic for any of those people except for Elizabeth, but I would say that some of those people are extreme personalities who have very unique views of how the world should operate. And Steve Jobs was known for being difficult, right? And I'm not sure Travis or Elon are known for being difficult, but they are strongly opinioned people. So you don't need to be nice. You need to be good at what you do. You need to be passionate, and you need to be effective. So I'm not looking for people who are nice. I'm not filtering for nice or courteous. This isn't like Sunday school or something. This is business. I'm looking for somebody who has the desire to win, the skills to win. Now, I don't want somebody who's going to break the law. That's bad. So they have to have a moral and ethical compass. But a lot of times changing the world means fighting incumbents, which means maybe not bending the rules, but changing them or changing the game. So just as candid as I can say it, I would not run from difficult people, but there's a point in time where somebody goes from being difficult to sociopathic, and I don't know that we perfectly can always figure that out. But probably the people who come close to that line are sometimes the people who change the world.
Hi, Wayman from San Francisco. Two questions. One, what's the ratio of deals you look at versus actually making investments in?
We have that in a future slide.
Okay. And the second question is, how do you differentiate between an accelerator versus an incubator?
Yeah, they're just two different words. Accelerators are now, it's the more popular word. We still call it the launch incubator. It's more of an accelerator. Incubators tend to be pre-product being launched, like it's incubating, the egg hasn't hatched yet. And then accelerators tend to be, you have the product, we're just trying to make it grow faster. So we're, truth be told, the launch accelerator, but I don't like the way that sounds. And so I just call it the launch incubator. Okay, take one more. These are fantastic questions, by the way.
Paul Dunn from Brisbane. Just got a question around passion projects versus social mission. I met with a guy last week who has a passion project around revolutionising education, but it also is a social mission. Is that something you'd steer away from?
Yes. And I'll tell you why. Capitalism and socialism, it's pretty far apart in terms of trying to service those two masters. What I tell founders, sure, you want to do good in the world, and you can build triple bottom line businesses, win-win-wins and all this kind of stuff. You can act ethically, but understand that the best model of capitalism and philanthropy we've seen in the history of humanity is rabid capitalism followed by rabid philanthropy. Bill Gates being the number one example. And what happens is, if you try to build an organization around philanthropy, everybody's saying constantly, oh, we made some money, let's give it away. Oh, let's lower the price. Oh, let's service that need. And then you attract the granola eating, hippy dippy people who want to do good in the world. as opposed to the marauding capitalist. And then you have a civil war inside your company where the sales team and the marauding capitalists now want to fight it out with the do-gooders. And I'm using funny words to keep you entertained, but it is the truth. I've seen it happen. And this happened at HandUp. When I was talking about it, I was like, are we charging for our software? They're like, no, we take a small percentage. I'm like, wait, no, don't take a small percentage of transactions. The people who are our customers buy Apple laptops. Apple may give them a 10% discount, but they're not getting the Apple laptops for free, nor is their rent free. In fact, there's whole groups of people who sell into nonprofits. So let's sell into nonprofits. Let's make the business sustainable. Let's sell them, $5,000 a year software or $500 a month, whatever it is. And then let's make ourselves sustainable. And they chose not to do that. And they tried to change it at the last minute, and the company blew up. And so I really think that these are very different things. Now, on a marketing basis, we have seen some companies incorporate into their marketing efforts this do-gooder stuff, like Tom's shoes, buy a pair, give a pair. Now, when they buy a pair, give a pair, I'm not sure they're the same shoes. I'm not sure they're coming in the same packaging. You know what I'm saying? Like, I have a feeling they're like dropping 10,000 pairs of shoes at once into one location, and then everybody who buys the shoes from Tom's is getting the fancy packaging. And maybe the shoe, it's really a marketing device, not at the core of the company. I could be wrong, but it really does cap the upside. I think that this might change because millennials are so principled that they might demand that companies work the way you're saying. I would much rather see the educational company you're talking about be sustainable through profits and then change the world and then have a foundation run by a different group of people in a different building. And that doesn't mean you can't treat your employees amazingly and give them the greatest benefits and the highest pay and have the highest standard of ethics. But just inside the company, the board of directors, how does the board of directors make a decision? Oh, we're going to raise prices. But raising prices hurts our customers. Yeah, but it will make us more sustainable. But it hurts our customers. Like, this is like a circular discussion, but it's much easier to say, oh, we're going to take the 1% pledge or something, or we're going to do what Google did and give 1% of the equity. Just if you feel that way as the founder and you're strong about it, do the 1% thing. 1% of our time, 1% of our equity, 1% of our profits go to nonprofits. And separate it. And then let the nonprofits do all that fruity granola, crazy, nutty stuff where they're, kumbaya and guitaring it and saving the world. It's different groups of people. That's the thing, is the management of those people would be so hard. Also, education is the hardest category, perhaps the hardest category in investing. Construction, health, music, and education. Among the hardest. The reason you're probably going to get a lot of deal flow in those areas is because those founders have the most difficult time raising money. Therefore, they're constantly on the road. Like, you will meet hundreds of investors trying to do something in music or education or health. And the reason is because they can never raise money to actually go back to work, the founders. Yeah, what did I say? Investors. Yeah, founders. And that's why you see so few funds focused on those things. That being said, two of my focuses right now are construction and education.
Hi, David from Melbourne. Quick question around when you're looking at great founders and they're deciding between different angel investors, apart from just the money, are there any other great qualities that you see those founders looking for? Like, what would draw a great founder to you as an investor?
They typically want your money, network, or knowledge, and probably in that order. Because if you give the money, they can get back to work. If you give them your network, they can get more money from your network. And then your knowledge, depending on who you are, that could be valuable. So you want to build a brand around what you do. So what do you do for a living? What is your super skill set, your superpower?
I have a startup called System Hub.
No. What is your superpower as an individual? What are you good at? Are you a developer? Are you a designer? Are you a salesperson? Are you a CEO?
Good marketer.
You're a marketer. Perfect.
Yeah.
So if you were a great marketer and you were investing in companies, you could look at startups and say, I think, I was looking at your marketing efforts. I see that you've got a Twitter handle that you don't update and you haven't registered your Instagram handle. I registered it for you. Here's the login and password. And by the way, your competitor is having great success doing Instagram ads and they write Medium posts. So I just gave you an idea and I did the keywords on Google keyword search, and it turns out, like, you may not know this, but the keywords and the special words you're not even optimizing for. In fact, your website doesn't have a robots.txt. If you're interested in getting together for lunch, I would love to meet with you because I'm also an angel investor. And that person will respond and call you in 30 seconds and be like, when can we meet? So that's how you demonstrate it, is just by telling them. And that's the value add that everybody in the room probably has some. Everybody here has some superpower that got them to become an accredited investor or to this level in their career.
Just a clarifying point, Dean McAvoy again. I advise a lot of startups, and I've seen a lot of advice given to them by investors who aren't experienced. They're intelligent, successful people that have made money in completely different fields, and they make the founders run off and do kind of crazy stuff that doesn't help their business. I just wanted to clarify the point you made before about early angel investors jumping directly in and learning from founders directly, and just wanted to caveat the people in the room to say, and maybe you disagree with this as well, Jason, but caveat to say, like, be careful the advice you give them if you haven't built a startup, if you haven't built a technology company, and also don't treat them like an investment that you've made previously on the stock market, where you might look at future cash flow and discount it back. Ask them to do 5-year business plans and things like that are a complete waste of time. So.
Yeah, we call this founder pinball in our industry, which is one group of investors is like, you should be an enterprise company. The other one's like, you should be a consumer company. And then the people in the back are like, what about being a data company? And it's like, what about the founder pursues the model that they want to pursue in their startup, right? So you've got to be very careful to not send people on wild goose chases and then keep asking for more and more data, because they need to focus on their customers. And almost universally, the answers come from talking to the customers and looking at the data, not from your ideas. I'll just tell you one anecdote. I was literally in a meeting with a venture capitalist who is not famous, but notable in Los Angeles. And he kept talking about, he would show up for the board meetings 15 to 30 minutes late, totally disheveled, sweating, from Malibu. And he started talking about what his wife thought of the product. And I just thought to myself at one point, I met your wife, no offense to your wife, but she doesn't work. She's got 3 kids, and she lives in a $15 million house on the beach. This product is an enterprise product for doctors. This is insane. Was your wife in healthcare at some point that I'm not aware of? No. She was in something completely different. So, yeah, some investors just do send people on goose chases. And if you're a small angel investor, if you invest in a founder, in all likelihood, if you did a good job picking the founder, your influence is not going to be there. What I train my incubator companies is to reflect back to the investor what they said. Oh, that's great feedback. You think we should be an enterprise company? That's great. We've heard that before, and we've given it a lot of thought. And let me explain to you why we chose to be a consumer company. This is the reason. Or say, that's great advice. We'll give that some thought, and we'll get back to you. And then you can get back to them later.
One other polarizing point is around patents. So you have.
Yeah, we'll get to that later.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think you bring up a really good point around these certain type of investor, and it goes back to that financial investor who maybe has an MBA who wants a 13 or 14-page business plan with, a 5-year projection for somebody that just built something and they don't even know what it is yet. And it can be really, really dangerous. You don't want to be asking them to waste a lot of time. And I think the common thread here is you want to be respectful. And I have a rule. I never tell somebody no via email. If I'm telling somebody no, I call them or I do it in person. Because I've said yes via an email, but I've not said no via an email. Because you have to really understand, put yourself in their place for a second. This is a person that's putting it all on the line. They've burnt the ships behind them. They're trying to do a startup. Sometimes you can give them a great piece of advice. I actually had somebody who told me, who I said no to, who said, you know what, you gave us one of the greatest pieces of advice we've ever heard. We're changing an aspect of our company. But you do want to be, and it's the emotional reaction you're going to have is to want to just say no via email, because nobody wants to say no. Nobody wants to disappoint somebody. Nobody wants to be the bad person in the process. But I think you owe it to them to give them your rationale why you said no. And it can be very difficult. But I believe you have to force yourself to do it. I think it's really important in the respect process. So no is pretty easy to define.
I say no by email, just as a function of the number of founders we're reviewing. I do like what you do in terms of doing it in person and building that long-term relationship or on the phone. The worst thing is not getting back to the founders at all. That is disrespectful, and everybody's done it by accident or just being overwhelmed with time. I tell people it's not a fit for me yet, or I don't think I'm the right investor for you, and I'll try to give them reasons. When people come to our incubator now, we have all the people who are the alumni who interview the folks put in their one-sentence reasons of why they would or not accept, or the challenges they have with the business. We then clean those up a little bit for grammar and spelling, but not for content. And we say, this is the feedback the mentors and the alumni gave for not accepting the company yet. But we do 6 classes a year, so we encourage you to think about this. It may or may not be helpful. We hope it's helpful, and apply again. So I like the not yet. So a lot of times I'll give people a not yet, and then they'll say, well, what will do it? And I say, like maybe if you can get a repeatable business process that can get to $100 million with $50 million in profits. And 1 out of 20 people will, or maybe 1 out of 10 or 20 people will explain to us how wrong we are in our incubator acceptance process, which is what we would expect. Like some people might be super passionate and tell us why we're wrong. That's generally a sign of like an immature founder that they feel the need to write us a 4-page email about why every single point is wrong. The much better thing to do is say, I really, for a more enlightened response from a founder would be like, appreciate the feedback. Obviously, I disagree with some of it, but I will come back and show you that you're wrong and prove it to you. That would be a much better response. But no response is the worst, because then you look flaky, like you never really considered it.
Yeah, you should really kind of have a process and a time frame when you're going to give them a decision and make that decision. The not yet category, one of the things I learned from Jason that's really useful is to ask them to put you on their investor updates. And this way you can see the progress of the company, and maybe you'll invest at a later round. And conversely, one of the things that I did is I advise my investors that, or my founders that I've invested in already, the ones I've actually said yes to create each quarter or month 2 updates, one for their existing investors, and then one for everybody who said no. And just because you might turn one of those around. It could be a very important person. It could be a person at Founders Fund, like Cyan Bannister might see something one day and say, you know what, they got me kind of over the hump of making that decision based on this piece of data, and you might not know what that data is as a founder. So I really try and kind of give them this piece of advice to have these 2 different versions of your update. The updates are critical, and we'll talk about why later. So deal structures. So YC came out with something called a SAFE, and I think it's just one thing that's important to understand. What's the difference between a SAFE and a convertible note? A SAFE is not a debt instrument, which means you do not get interest on it, and it does not define any type of a term for payback. It's a simple agreement for future equity, and those 2 things can be, I think, misunderstood to some extent. There's not a huge difference between the 2, but it's important, I think, for you to understand that there is a difference. Sometimes you'll jump into a deal and you get common stock to start with, or preferred stock more commonly. And then finally, this concept of advisory agreements. We had the question about that. Do you want to expand on it now, Jason?
Yeah, so advisory agreements are valid, real things in the world. They typically run 10 to 50 basis points in America for early stage startups. They typically have a duration of 24 months. They typically vest monthly, and they typically can be ended by either party immediately just with an email. The good ones have an explicit statement of work of what is expected. So if you were going to be the advisor to my company at inside.com, I'd say, I would like to meet with you quarterly for 1 hour in person. I would like to be able to email you unlimited amount of times, talk to you once on the phone, and get introductions reasonably to other investors and partners. And it's not like it's a contract like you're going to give me 7 introductions to these 7 important people, but it's just a framework for expectations so that, which is better than none. And then for the advisors, they know going into it, if you're going to be an advisor to the gentleman in the 3rd row, you know you have to perform, and you don't want them to give you the equity if you're not performing. That would be lame on your part. It would be greedy and unethical, and you wouldn't want to do that. And for them, They certainly wouldn't want to cancel it if you were performing, but it would be their right to. And I had, in one case, a company pursued me, gave me 1% in an advisor agreement. I told them 50 points was fine. They insisted on a point. 2 years later, they canceled mine, and I was left with the option of suing them. And they wouldn't even give me the amount I had earned. It was like a 4-year vest. And I just told them, I was like, I'm not going to sue you because I'm not in the business of suing founders. And anybody who would use somebody the way you've used me is not going to have a successful company in all likelihood, and you've done me a favor in getting me out of this deal. I tell the story in the book. It's pretty funny.
And I think once you get common stock in the company, it's very important at that time. In the United States, we have a tax benefit called qualified small business stock, and there's a 5-year term where you don't pay tax. And I think here in Australia, there's something equivalent around an accredited innovation company or something like that. So it's important once you get stock that you note that, and that in the documents you ask the company to represent whether they qualify for that tax treatment. Here's some other issues to consider early on. The most important is pro rata rights. Does everybody understand the concept of pro rata rights? So when you buy stock, you own theoretically, or you get a note, a certain percentage of the company. Pro rata rights means you can maintain that percentage in future rounds before other investors come in. Why is this important? We'll show you later on. But typically, that company that gets a future round of investment is a signal that that was one of your successful ones. It's a small signal, but it's a very important one because
It's
they don't
probably
get that
the
to
best
failure.
signal is that other people are investing and the valuation's going up. Outside investors investing means they went through a process that you went through earlier, and they agreed with your assessment that this company is worthy of investment. And the bigger the check size and the more notable the investor's track record, the better you can feel about that investment. Sometimes you'll get outside investment from some weird rich person who made a bunch of money and they're going to put $10 million into the company because they got an inheritance, or they made a bunch of money in the cannabis market, like literally had one of those recently. Like, yeah, this person made like $50 million taking a company public in Canada, and they're going to do a $7 million Series A in this company, and then they disappeared. It's like, okay, that's not a credible investor, right? We knew that was a possibility.
Valuation or cap, how is that determined? Another really critical idea. You probably won't have the ability to determine it, but if there hasn't been a lead investor yet to negotiate it, I personally wouldn't agree. I would wait for them to get that lead investor who might be able to argue it, and I would explain to them the idea that you wouldn't want to come in behind somebody else who then lowered it. You would want those most favored nation terms, as Jason mentions. Investor updates. There's a very high correlation between successful founders and people that send out regular updates. I always tell the founders that you're writing it not necessarily for me, but you're writing it for yourself. It's just this is like one of those, habits of highly successful people. A person's ability to sit down for a moment and document where they are in a point in time and write down where they think they're going and where they've been is really, really critical. Because if you don't do that, it kind of is a sign that you easily lie to yourself or kind of make up kind of the situation where you are, or you don't want to admit where your problems are. One of the things that we've seen recently, one of the things that Jason does, is actually put it in the investor documents, right?
Yeah, we say we want 10 investments, updates a year. Sometimes we get 6 or 7. It's not like we're going to sue the company if we don't get an update. But it just sets the seriousness of it that it's in the documents. And then we'll even define information rights to include bank statements, P&L, Google Analytics, iTunes, Connect, data, and we'll ask them for that kind of data. Now, we're owning 10, 20% of a company these days on average, so we can ask for more than maybe somebody who owns 10 or 20 basis points does. But early on, this kind of stuff is important to set the tone with the founder of what the expectation is, and you can have a reasonable discussion about it. I had one, very legendary founder who's like, I don't want to do 10 updates, I'm doing quarterly. And I was like, okay. Then he came back and was like, hey, I really need you to not go pro rata in this next round. I want you to put in, like 3 times because optically it's going to help me get these other investors and they keep asking about you. And I said, great. I'm open to considering that. Would you consider doing monthly updates? He's like, absolutely. I said, great. Now we see it eye to eye. And that's where I've been able to really, really get people to change their position on these updates, is when they want to get us to keep investing. And it's a good time to sort of reassess the relationship.
ICO protection, do you want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, you can have some companies who get distracted with doing ICOs. It's pretty hot right now. Almost universally, if somebody wants to do this stuff and they're not like a crypto-based company with that's their core mission, it's probably because their core business is doing so poorly that they want to distract themselves with raising this non-dilutive, Chuck E. Cheese tokens or whatever. Chuck E. Cheese is an arcade in America. So one of the things that people are putting into documents is if you're going to do an ICO, we as investors and owners in the company will have access to participate in that. And what I like to do is say we'll have warrants. So one of my portfolio companies came up with this concept, Rob May, who's actually going to speak, I think, tomorrow. He flew in from America to talk about it at the festival. He basically gave all of us who are investors the ability, a 10-year warrant to buy tokens. This way we didn't have them gifted to us and have a tax event, nor do we have to pay for them. We just get a warrant to buy a certain number of them. So has anybody had to deal with a company they invested in doing an ICO yet? Okay, it's happening in America. I've got about 4 out of 150 companies now who have done this. So it's about 2 or 3%. I have a feeling that's going to die down after the uniqueness of this. But we'll all be dealing with tokenized securities. Probably 100% of the investments we do in 10 years will be done with tokens, and we'll be able to freely trade them. So literally, we could go out here into the hall at the break, and we'll just take out our sticks and be like, waving them and tapping them and, transferring tokens. Like, oh, you got some Uber, I got some Airbnb. You want to trade 2 Ubers for 1 Airbnb? Great, we'll double tap. And that's not a bad idea for a product, a USB stick for investors to trade stuff. And you'll even be able to do that, I believe, with funds. So imagine I was LPs in a Sequoia fund, and you were LPs in a launch fund, and you were in Founders Fund, and we could all be like, yeah, you want to just triple down, and we just blend it and see how we do, or trade 10% each. It's going to be kind of interesting times.
I think the last thing you want to know is whether there's an option pool for the employees. You want to make a mental note of that, because when the company does have a priced stock round, it's important to know. So we're getting a little signal in the back about maybe taking a break. Do you want to end this section? Or
is this the end of the section? Or?
No, we just started this section. We have about 15 minutes ago.
Keep going. We'll
Sure.
15 minutes and we'll take a break.
Okay, great. How's everybody doing, by the way? Is this useful so far? Good.
Good. All right.
Initial valuation. So there's a lot of math here. Sorry, I didn't warn everybody that was going to be math. But really, the important thing I want you to take away from this slide is that if you have a company that you've invested at either a $3 million initial valuation, a 6, or a 9, if you look at the bottom, you can see the return on the same sale with the same 50% dilution makes a big, big difference. And certainly in the U.S. market, we saw valuations start out in the $3 to $5 million range, jump up to 10 on a regular basis, 15, sometimes even 20, right? Yeah. Some crazy numbers.
Uncapped.
Uncapped. And now they've seemed to come back down to earth. But that initial valuation can make a real big difference in your return. And given that your 1 or 2 companies, as we'll show later, will determine the total success of your portfolio, it is something really to consider. And if you have 2 equal investments that you believe in, and it's more often that the investments are competing for your money than the opposite way around, by the way. I've never really been turned down from giving somebody money. Usually they'll make extra room for you if necessary. It is important for you to understand that initial valuation and why really at the end of the day, it makes a big difference.
And here's another little secret. I'll just tell you a quick anecdote. A Y Combinator company came to me and they're like, yeah, we want an $11 million valuation. I thought this company was pretty clever. And they were combining, the company's gone now, so I can talk about it. I won't say the name exactly, but they were combining LinkedIn with Tinder. 2 great services. I was like, oh, this is very interesting. So you say, I want a, chief marketing officer for my company. And you swipe through the, chief marketing officers, and they swipe through the opportunity because the chief marketing officer says, I wonder if there's any CMO jobs. And if you double swipe, all of a sudden you get dumped into a chat room. Pretty cool. It sounds like a reasonable thing. So I said, okay. They showed me the graph, and the graph was 5 weeks of them being in Y Combinator, and it was like, okay, I know that graph. That's you spent money. I was like, how much money did you spend on Facebook ads? And they were like, yeah, we spent whatever, 25,000 of our 100,000 in YC money. I was like, okay, I know how they do that. $1,000 the first week, $3,000 the next week, $10,000 the next, and $15,000 in the graduation week. Just ramp up your engagement so that you can literally make the chart that you're like, oh my God, this is taking off. So always ask, tell me about marketing. What were the sources of that traffic that came in? And he said he wanted an $11 million valuation. I said, oh, that's interesting. When I invested in Uber and Thumbtack, it was $9 million. And they said, well, it's only $2 million more, and it's like 3 years later. I said, oh, I didn't finish the sentence. It was $9 million combined. Uber was 5 and Thumbtack was a $4 million valuation. They were much further along than you. He's like, yeah, it doesn't matter if we're a unicorn. Well, this chart tells you it does. And then here's another way to look at it. If you were to invest in the company in the last example for $9 million, you could invest in the first 2 and get 2 swings at bat for the same price as the third. So the way I look at it is, all things being equal, if you feel, like Mike is saying, equally strong about 3 different companies, and you're going to make the investment, well, you might get 2 swings at bat, 2 shots on goal. I don't know what the analogy is here, but you're going to get like, two chances to put the ball in the basket. So it does matter. For the advisor in our room, you could say, I'll do the middle situation. I'll put the 30,000 in, but I'd like a 50 basis point advisor agreement. And then you got yourself down to your $3 million valuation, right? You got 50 basis points as an advisor, and you bought 50. So I've said to companies, I don't agree with the valuation, but if you wanted to make me an advisor, I'll work for it, and you can give me a little extra. And therefore, now I'm getting a better deal than the investors in the front row who paid the $9 million, but I'm going to earn my 50 basis points by doing work that they didn't choose to do.
And the important thing is this seems to be an issue that gets glossed over and nobody talks about. I've said to one founder that I kind of liked the company, but I thought the valuation was too high. And he came back and said, well, we actually have a little bit left in this earlier round I can give you at the 5. So I was like, oh, that sounds good. I'll take that one then. It was an interesting turn.
That's ridiculous. I've never heard that story.
So this is the end of the section, and we can take a break now, Dale, if you want. Or we can ask people can ask some questions.
Yeah, how about we do 2 questions? 2 quick questions. And these questions have been exceptional. I just want to make a note of that. Very good.
Paris, Gold Coast. I've invested in a company where I've taken on the lead role as an investor, but I don't have any equity given as an advisor. I'm putting in a lot of work with them, and I don't mind, but it looks like it may get out of control. How do you deal with it? And do you go back retrospectively and say, look, happy to help. I've got deep domain expertise, and I'm helping you help yourself and myself, but is it too late to go back and say, give me a small cut as an advisor? Or
the way you said it sounded perfect to me. I would just sit down and say, listen, Susan, I'm happy to help. It feels like this is moving from just a phone call and a quick coffee to you want me to come to the office. I know everything about the company. Obviously, as a lead investor, I don't want you to pay me cash, and I don't need cash. But I think it would be fair if I'm going to come in for 1 day a week for me to get 50 basis points over the next 2 years. And you can fire me at any time if I'm not performing, obviously, and no hard feelings. And if you want to change it, we could change it too. But I think this would be the most fair, and I would feel the most comfortable with that. How do you feel about it? And then you just have an open discussion. If you can't have that discussion with your CEO, Susan, like it's probably something's wrong. So yeah, I think just being candid about that. Also, you have to understand how you're going to be perceived in the market. For Jason Calacanis in 2018, if I asked for advisor shares, it looks pretty lame. So I have a no advisor share rules. But when I was coming up and I was broke, I was like, well, I need to get on this cap table any way I can. I need some cash. I got to figure out how I'm going to buy a house. And so I was just like, I'll put 10K in. Can I get 25 basis points? Or can I get 50 basis points? I'll put 5K in. And people would work with me. In fact, I was mentioning Calm.com before. The founder emailed me. He's like, oh, are you going to execute your options? I was like, what options? He's like, you have options. I was like, oh, I forgot I negotiated them. He's like, they're worth $1 million. I'm like, okay, great. Awesome. Let's get some more Teslas. I have no more room for Teslas in the driveway.
Hi, I'm Wayne again from San Francisco. Have you ever exited upon the subsequent raise, let's say from C to A, because you didn't like the new investors or the direction of the company or the pivot?
What a great question. I have had 2 or 3 situations like this where the founder and I did not see eye to eye. And in one case, I said to the founder gave themselves super voting shares, where they had 100 to 1 or 40 to 1 voting shares. And like, this incubator told me this was critical. I was like, critical if you're Mark Zuckerberg and you made everybody a billionaire And when they're leaving the board of the public company, they do this as a last, like, thank you high five on the way out. Like, you realize, like, when you go meet with the venture capitalist, I can never introduce you to one because you did this covertly. And they would tell me, hey, Jason, you're a dipshit. Your founder is an idiot. They gave themselves super voting rights, and they've never even run a company before. It's their first company. So I said to the person, listen, you did this without telling me. It makes me look really stupid to other investors. I tell you what, rip up the term sheet, give me the $25K back. I know the company's increased in value. I don't want any additional money, but let's just call it a day. We'll just negate the note, and you can move on. And they were like, can I think about it? I was like, of course you can think about it. Like, literally got an email later that night. Thank you for telling me that this was a bad idea. I appreciate it. I really value as an investor. No, I want to keep in the cap table. I had somebody come to our incubator and not show up for class. And I was like, okay, well, I made a big mistake. And actually, like, 2 of my team members were like, we don't like that guy. And I was like, yeah, but sometimes crazy wins the day. And they're like, yeah, but this guy's a little too crazy. So I was like, I want to take a risk. Sure enough, they were right. I was wrong. I was like, yeah, but I want to play, like, 7-8 suited. It feels good. You know, it's like poker people are getting the reference. Like, it just feels right this time. And so I just said to them, listen, take us off the cap table, give us the money back. He's like, and then he comes to me like a couple months later. He's like, we're raising at a $10 million valuation. I'd like to buy your shares back. And I was like, but you said no when I asked for them back, and now you're raising a 10. I was like, absolutely not. And I'm still in business with this person, but I told him, like, please do not tell anybody I'm an investor, like, because it's going to be awkward for both of us. Like, I'm trying to buy my shares back, then you're raising money at a higher valuation. You don't want to give them back. I said, this is getting too dicey. Like, and since people are going to recognize my name because there's 15 people in the world with the last name Calacanis and only one of them angel invests, and he wrote a book on it, like, they're going to recognize that name. Like, put a different name there, whatever you got to do. Just get me off the cap table or don't tell me, because then I do get these phone calls. And that's a big issue. Like, I never want to, even if I don't see eye to eye with the founder, I never want to, like, tell another investor, like, this is bad. So, like, you can tell, I'll give you the signal, which is, if you ask another angel investor, hey, I saw you invest in that company, how's it going? And they go, it's kind of the VC shrug. It's like, yeah, interesting guy. It's just like, run, you know, like, if you have invested in a company, if that company is doing any kind of a decent job, you're like, incredible, going to change the world because it's in your best interest, you know, like, and you want to root for them. So even if it's a long shot, you're like, yeah, you know, they got a bunch of bad beats and they keep fighting and I think they're going to figure it out. Like, that's when you believe, like, the company is, like, done a terrible job, and it's like, most investors would say something like that to you. Yeah, they've had it rough. Man, oof, that person's a trooper. I think they're going to make it. So I think being candid with people and getting off the cap table is a good idea if you don't believe in the company anymore. It's in their best interest. And you can go put that money back to work, and they don't want to have somebody on the cap table who's not rooting for them. It's just a weird, dysfunctional thing. And the 3 or 4 times it's happened, I've been very direct. I want off the cap table. Just give me my money back. If the company's gone up twice in value, fine. Just give me my money back at 1x or 1.5. I'll put it to work somewhere else. It's a great question.
So why don't we take a break now? 10 minutes? Yeah. Great.
All right, thanks, everybody. What, no round of applause? What happened there? You're killing me. All right, it's a little hot in here. A little hot, right?
There's a water station at the back of the room here. Water station.
Michael?
This break will be 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.